Since the start of the Premier League in 1992, there have been 34 Premier League seasons with only 12 managers managing to win it across 7 different teams. So, going club by club, we're going to go through 8 of the greatest sides the league has ever seen to answer the simple question, who was the greatest? And starting with Mourinho's Chelsea.
We have top players. And I'm sorry, I'm a bit arrogant, we have a top manager. I'm European champion, so I'm not one of the bottle. I think I'm a special one.
Jose Mourinho was officially a Blue, signing a 3-year contract at Chelsea Football Club with a massive job ahead of him. Chelsea hadn't won the league in over 50 years, and they had recently been bought out by Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich, and he was going to settle for nothing less than success. But the issue was that this was a team of losers, with the only player who ever won something significant being Claude Makelele. The rest, nothing. As soon as he arrived, he cleaned house, getting rid of 9 players. He brought his same backroom staff in from Porto, and he pretty much had an open checkbook, so he started bringing in players. Thiago, Cech, Kezman, Drogba, and Carvalho and Ferreira, who followed him from Porto, along with the likes of Lampard and Terry that were already in the squad, meant Mourinho had put together a team capable of winning the lot. Chelsea had finished 4th in the previous season, with Manchester United and Arsenal being the 2 clear top dogs in English football. But despite this, Jose had a belief in himself and his players, even going as far as to tell them the exact day they would win the league, that being the 30th of April. By early December, Chelsea were flying. They were top of the Premier League, they were through to the knockout stages of the Champions League, and Jose was already starting a feud with his city rival, Arsene Wenger. At the start, I didn't like Arsenal. Now, I'm in love with them. Every weekend, they lose points. Jose Mourinho was becoming box office in England. He was cocky and arrogant, but this was all back with his results on the pitch. He won the first trophy he could possibly win, beating Liverpool in extra time in the League Cup final, and then he left the pitch shushing the Liverpool fans. By the turn of the year, Chelsea were flying at the top of the league and were through to the Champions League knockout stages, facing off against Barcelona in the round of 16 and knocking them out in controversial fashion. In the first leg, Drogba was handed a red card, which caused Mourinho to speak out against the referees, going as far to say that the Barcelona manager went into the referees' room at halftime to get them to sway the game. This resulted in mayhem for the referee, with Chelsea fans abusing him and going as far as to send death threats, forcing him to retire from refereeing as a whole. After this, Mourinho was labeled an enemy of football by UEFA and was banned from the next round's ties. Despite the ban, Jose still made his way into the stadium as Chelsea faced Bayern in the quarterfinals. Jose snuck into the changing room hours before the match kicked off and then snuck out in a laundry basket to make sure he would still be able to talk to his team, and these tactics worked as Chelsea beat Bayern 6-5 over both legs, progressing to the semi-finals of the competition. They faced Liverpool in the semi-final and were eliminated 1-0, but this was with a goal that never actually crossed the line, leaving Jose to feel very hard done by. But despite the Champions League upset, the day finally came, the 30th of April, where Chelsea played against Bolton. Lampard scored 2, and Chelsea were crowned champions. They went on to finish the Premier League season with a record-breaking 95 points, but even more impressive than that, they only conceded 15 goals, which is a record that will probably never be broken. Jose had conquered England within just 1 season, but he still had a lot more in him as he kicked off the 05-06 season, beating his beloved Arsenal to lift the Community Shield. This season, Mourinho's men lifted a 2nd Premier League in a row, winning it against Man United, meaning Ferguson's men had to give the Blues a guard of honor as they were crowned champions. Frank Lampard finished 2nd in the Ballon d'Or this year as Mourinho turned him into one of the best football players on the planet. But yet again, Chelsea fell short in Europe, this time being knocked out in the round of 16 by Barcelona. Just more fuel added to the anti-Barcelona fire. As much as the results on the pitch were world-class, by his 3rd season in London, there was growing speculation that Jose and Abramovich were having issues amongst themselves. But despite the unrest, Chelsea still won the League Cup against Arsenal and the FA Cup against United, but unfortunately lost the Premier League to Man United, who were taking back English football with the likes of Ronaldo and Rooney. And they also lost the Champions League again in the semi-finals and again to Liverpool. Jose had now won every trophy possible in England in just 3 seasons, but now a storm was brewing at Stamford Bridge as the 07-08 season would prove to be Jose's worst one yet. The relationship with Abramovich was already on the rocks, with players like Shevchenko and Ballack being signed against Jose's will in the previous year, but as long as results were there, Abramovich couldn't get rid of him. But this season started off worse than usual, with losses in the league, draws in the Champions League, and the average match attendance decreasing until the 20th of September, when it was announced that Jose Mourinho would be leaving Chelsea by mutual consent. Mourinho ended his time at Chelsea as the club's most successful manager, winning 6 trophies and having never lost a game at home in his time there. But as I'm sure you know, Mourinho's Chelsea story was far from over, because almost a decade later, Jose was back in blue. Jose returned to Chelsea Football Club, and he was happy to be reunited with Lampard, Terry, and even the owner Abramovich, as they had seemingly got back on good terms. But this Chelsea team was different to the one he left all those years ago. They had won the Champions League and the Europa League in the meantime, but were less dominant in the Premier League. But confident as always, Mourinho opened his second stint at Chelsea by saying, "If we don't win the league but show an evolution in the first season, then we'll win it in the second season." And as usual, Jose's prediction was spot on. When he arrived, it's interesting to see the talent he had in the squad, with Salah, De Bruyne, and Juan Mata all being present, but quickly getting moved on as he opted for players like Hazard and Willian instead. Since Chelsea were the reigning Europa League champions, Mourinho started off the season playing the Super Cup against Guardiola's Bayern Munich, where they went down to 10 men and lost the match. But Jose obviously had some words about it. They take the cup and the best team lost. As the season progressed, Mourinho played down Chelsea's title chances, always referring to this season as transitional. And that was how it turned out, as they finished 4 points behind champions Man City and were also knocked out of the Champions League in the semi-finals, meaning no silverware this season. There was a slightly different tone to Mourinho. It was almost as if he'd mellowed slightly, but not too much, as he still produced some memorable moments, like when he told his beloved Arsene Wenger that he is a specialist in failure for not winning a trophy for 8 years. But as much as Mourinho seemed to have mellowed, his second season would be as good as ever. He signed 3 key players in Thibaut Courtois, Cesc Fabregas, and, most important of all, Diego Costa, an animal up front, as Mourinho believed his team lacked the balls to win. In the 2014-15 season, they were only behind for 1 single week, as Spurs led on goal difference for week 2, and for the rest of the season, they were on top until the 3rd of May, when they defeated Crystal Palace and were crowned Premier League champions with 3 games to spare. Jose Mourinho was named manager of the season, as they only lost 3 games all year. In the other competitions, Chelsea were knocked out of the FA Cup and the Champions League, but Jose did lead his team to the League Cup, making that a domestic double in his second season back. Now season 3 was rolling in, and Jose Mourinho was going to be there to stay, signing a new 4-year contract. But it's here that Mourinho would suffer the worst start to a season in his entire career. They started the season picking up only 11 points in their first 12 games, and they were knocked out of the League Cup by Stoke City. Things were not looking good, and they reached a breaking point on the 17th of December as Chelsea sat in 16th place, prompting the Chelsea board to pull the plug and sack the man who gave them so much. But how the hell did this happen? It seemed like the players had simply turned on him. Like what happened at Real Madrid, he lost the dressing room, and without them on your side, you're dead as a manager. Not to mention more arguments he was having with the board, and altogether it just spelled disaster. Jose's man management style was starting to be doubted. Players were getting softer and having more power in their hands, but Jose was eager to prove everyone wrong, and luckily for him, there was a new job available over in Manchester, meaning on the 27th of May, 2016, Jose Mourinho signed as the new Manchester United manager, but little did he know about the roller coaster ride it was going to be over there. But unfortunately for Jose, his Manchester United does not get a place on the list of Premier League greats, because the only Manchester United sides that do were the ones managed by the great Sir Alex Ferguson. But before we get to those, we first have to discuss what was arguably the most magical season in Premier League history. In April 2015, Leicester City sat bottom of the Premier League as they were almost guaranteed to get relegated, but somehow they survived, and in that same summer, their best player left on a free, they were forced to sack their manager, and all they signed was a bunch of nobodies as they were yet again favorites to get relegated from the Premier League. But that's not quite what happened, because somehow, with a new manager everyone laughed at, players nobody gave a chance to, and with almost no transfer budget, Leicester City were crowned champions of the Premier League in the most impossible season football has ever witnessed. But how on earth did they do it? How did the worst team in the entire league become the champions of England? This is not just another story. This is the full story of the greatest underdog team in the history of football. The story begins in March 2015 with Leicester City rock bottom of the Premier League, having not won a football match since January, as they looked destined to get relegated back to the Championship, where they had spent most of the last decade and, at this point, was where they belong. You see, Leicester weren't a big club by any stretch of the imagination. They had a few big moments in their history, like the League Cup win in the 1990s, but come 2008, they fell as far as the 3rd division of English football, so their 20th place in the Premier League was pretty much expected. Their manager at the time was East Midlands local Nigel Pearson, who had been Leicester's head coach since 2008 and was a tough guy who would regularly swear at journalists and even once strangled an opponent during one of Leicester's matches. But despite his temper, he was a good manager who knew the Championship well, and that's how he managed to get Leicester promoted with an incredible 102 points. But the step up to the Premier League seemed too much. And it's not surprising Leicester sat rock bottom of the league because their squad simply wasn't very good, or at least that's what we thought at the time. In goal was Kasper Schmeichel, who was forever in the shadow of his father, Peter Schmeichel. In defense, there's captain Wes Morgan, the definition of brick shithouse, who at the start of his career was told he was too fat to be a footballer and had played more than 400 games in the Championship or below. In midfield, there was Danny Drinkwater, who had joined Leicester in 2012 after being released from Manchester United without ever playing a game. The wings saw Mark Albrighton, who had been deemed not good enough for a poor Aston Villa side, and Riyad Mahrez, a skinny winger who hated the cold weather and had been plucked from the French 2nd Division. Up front, there was a striker who Leicester had found in non-league obscurity, who was only a few years earlier playing to crowds of a few hundred supporters, who would spend more time boozing with his mates than doing fitness training, Jamie Vardy. And really, as much as some of these players are greats of the game today, nobody, and I mean nobody, thought they could ever become something back in 2015. But then in April, it's like a switch flicked and something changed. Leicester started winning. It began against West Ham, where Leicester's star player, summer signing Esteban Cambiaso, scored early on, and local lad Andy King got a late goal to give Leicester a 2-1 win. Then, the next week, Jamie Vardy scored a dramatic last-minute winner to complete a 3-2 comeback against West Brom. A 2-0 win over Swansea took Leicester off the bottom of the Premier League before Jamie Vardy scored the only goal of the game against Burnley to complete a 4-match winning streak and take Leicester out of the relegation zone for the first time since November. But the Foxes would come crashing back down to earth with a 2-1 loss against Chelsea, and the pressure finally made head coach Nigel Pearson snap when in a press conference he would call a journalist a stupid ostrich, saying, "If you don't know the answer to that question, then I think you're an ostrich. Your head must be in the sand. Are you flexible enough to get your head in the sand?" My suspicion would be no. But this ostrich rant seemingly reinvigorated Leicester, who then smashed Newcastle 3-0 and beat Southampton 2-0, drew against Sunderland, and hammered QPR 5-1 to finish the season in an incredible 14th, completing the greatest escape in Premier League history. And it was such an achievement that striker Jamie Vardy, who a few years before had been playing non-league football, got an unlikeliest of call-ups to the England national team, and somehow, within just 2 months, it looked like fortune had turned for Leicester City. But over the summer, the club were going to enter a state of crisis, as seemingly poor signings and bad management was set to put the entire club in jeopardy. But now, before we get into the disaster of a summer and then the greatest season in the history of the Premier League, I just want to ask you to subscribe. It's free, and you can always unsubscribe later. Okay, now into the summer of disaster, and then, finally, the year of glory. As Leicester City entered the summer of 2015, their star midfielder and player of the season Esteban Cambiasso turned down a new contract and decided to go to Olympiacos in Greece instead. And that wasn't even the worst news of the summer, as Leicester were about to become the joke of the footballing world as their Thai owners decided to treat the team with a trip to Thailand. But some of the reserve players reportedly made a racist sex tape while in Thailand, and to make things worse, one of those players was James Pearson, the head coach's own son. So the club's owners were understandably furious, and Nigel Pearson was sacked as head coach of Leicester City, leaving the club needing a new head coach. So within just 1 month, Leicester City went from the greatest survival story in the Premier League to losing their star man and their manager, and this is when they made the greatest decision in their club's history. Except at the time, nobody would think that that would be the case. They decided to go for a head coach whose win percentage in his previous job was the lowest of any head coach ever, 0%. They chose a head coach who had been sacked by the Greece national team after losing every single one of his 4 games in charge, including a 1-0 loss to the Faroe Islands, which The Guardian called the biggest upset ever, as the Faroe Islands, whose entire population could almost fit inside Leicester City's stadium, were ranked 169 places below Greece in the FIFA rankings. That head coach was Claudio Ranieri, who had never won the league despite coaching some huge teams before, such as Juventus, Inter Milan, and Atletico Madrid. But in England, he was known for his spell at Chelsea, where he was nicknamed the Tinkerman for constantly changing his tactics and starting lineups. And despite being hired by some of football's biggest names in his almost 30-year career, the Tinkerman had only won 2 major trophies, the Coppa Italia with Fiorentina and the Copa del Rey with Valencia, both in the 1990s. His personality and humor was the opposite of the brash and combative Pearson, but would that be the right personality for what many assumed would be a relegation battle? Pundits lined up to slag off Ranieri, with The Guardian saying it was baffling to appoint him and that if they wanted someone to keep them in the Premier League, then they may have gone for the wrong guy. That summer signings didn't really look like they would strengthen Leicester either, as the club signed Christian Fuchs, a player recovering from a long-term knee injury, and they made permanent the signing of Robert Huth in defense, as Huth had formed a solid partnership with Morgan while on loan at Leicester the previous season. And to replace Cambiasso in midfield, Leicester brought in the unknown N'Golo Kante from French side Cannes, where he had impressed in the previous season for his ball recovery skills. Up front, Leicester signed Japanese forward Shinji Okazaki from Mainz for £7 million, giving them a net spend of £20 million, basically peanuts in the Premier League these days. And with none of these signings wowing the pundits, Leicester were once again favourites for relegation and given odds of 5,000 to 1 to win the league, which is the same odds that you would get for a bet on finding Elvis Presley still alive or proving that the Loch Ness Monster is real. But it's these impossible odds and this impossible circumstance that made this next season so extremely magical. Leicester's first game of the 15-16 season was against Sunderland, a team also tipped to go down, so when Leicester won 4-2 with Vardy scoring early,
does deliver, helped on by who? It's found the way in!
and Mahrez getting 2 goals,
It is Mahrez!
nobody really paid much attention, but there suddenly was a lot of attention on Jamie Vardy later that week after a video of Vardy emerged that almost ended his Premier League career, as he was filmed in a casino using a racial slur toward another customer. But after Vardy apologized, Leicester decided not to sack him for what he called a regrettable error in judgment. And after that, Vardy would blank against West Ham, with Okazaki grabbing his first Premier League goals and Mahrez scoring again, giving the Foxes 2 wins from 2. 2 draws against Spurs and Bournemouth were followed by a 3-2 win over Aston Villa, and a 2-2 draw against Stoke meant Leicester had gone unbeaten for 6 games. But this great start was put to rest with a 5-2 battering by Arsenal, shattered with the BBC saying that Leicester's defense was so leaky that the club would soon find itself sliding down the table, as the team was yet to keep a clean sheet and conceded an average of 2 goals a game. So to try to encourage his defenders, Claudio Ranieri told his team that if they keep a clean sheet, he would buy pizzas for the whole team. Talk about man management. Now, let's have a quick look at Leicester's tactics heading into the season, as they took a different approach to the top teams in England, opting for a classic 4-4-2 formation, with one striker dropping deep to help the midfield and the other playing on the last man to try to beat the offside trap. And unsurprisingly, Leicester didn't pass the ball around as much as the likes of Arsenal or Manchester City, and only averaged 43% possession, but they were the best in the league for interceptions and ball recoveries, and they were second best for tackles. And their tactics were pretty basic. have a deep back line to get the best out of the immobile but strong-in-the-air centre-backs Wes Morgan and Robert Huth, and also to create space for Leicester's other players to run into, as Jamie Vardy, Jeff Schlupp, and Mark Albrighton were among the fastest players in the league, with Ranieri saying, "My team is like the RAF. It's fantastic. Whoosh whoosh," as he compared the players to fighter jets. But the whole plan was tied together by the incredible passing skills of Riyad Mahrez, who would constantly find Jamie Vardy with his long-range passes, and if Leicester got an early goal, then they would just sit back and let the other team make stupid mistakes while chasing the game. While these tactics were simple, they were effective. But that loss to Arsenal meant Leicester had dropped back down to 6th in the league, and nobody expected them to finish any higher than mid-table, and what is definitely for sure, absolutely nobody expected what was about to happen next. You see, in that Arsenal loss, Jamie Vardy scored both of Leicester's goals, meaning he had now scored for 4 games in a row, and despite breaking his wrist, Vardy scored a penalty in Leicester's next match against Norwich to get them back to winning ways. 2 more goals in a draw against Southampton put him on 9 goals in 9 games, and he then scored his 7th game in a row to give Leicester a 1-0 win against Crystal Palace. But rather than celebrating Vardy's impressive achievement, Ranieri was off to the pizza shop as Leicester had finally kept a clean sheet. And with goals in 7 consecutive games, everyone was starting to take notice of Vardy. But in Vardy's next game against West Brom, he went down injured, and it looked like the incredible goal-scoring run was over. But after lengthy treatment, Vardy returned to the game and scored moments later to keep his incredible run going. Vardy scored again from the penalty spot against Watford and got the opener in a 3-0 win against Newcastle that took Leicester back to the top of the Premier League. And that goal meant Vardy had scored in 10 straight games, equaling the record set by Manchester United's Ruud van Nistelrooy. And of course, Leicester's next game was against Manchester United, so Vardy decided to wear golden boots for the game, and when he scored with a low finish past David De Gea in the 24th minute to break Van Nistelrooy's record, he of course celebrated by telling United fans he had the record now. But while Leicester were second with 29 points, Ranieri wasn't getting carried away, saying, "Our first priority is to get to 40 points. That is our goal to keep us in the Premier League." And while Vardy was making the headlines, Riyad Mahrez also had 7 goals and 5 assists at this point, and the two of them were quickly being recognized as the deadliest duo in the Premier League. But as Vardy would fail to score in the next game against Swansea, it meant his legendary goal-scoring run would come to an end. But the Foxes wouldn't have to worry, as Mahrez would take over goal-scoring duties, scoring a hat-trick against the Swans to bring his total to 10 goals in 14 games. And now, people were really starting to take notice of Leicester City, but surely this good run of form was going to come to an end, right? Leicester won their next 2 games against Chelsea and Everton before losing 1-0 to Liverpool on Boxing Day, which dropped the Foxes back down to 2nd in the league once again, and the period just after Christmas is seen as a make-or-break period in English football as the games come thick and fast. But Leicester seemed to forget how to score, drawing their next 2 games 0-0 before a 1-0 win over Spurs, and a 1-1 draw over Villa meant they had just 1 win in 5, and now people were really expecting Leicester to drop away, with even die-hard Leicester City fan Gary Lineker believing they would fall down the table. So Lineker made the promise to present match of the day in his underwear if Leicester did win the league, saying there was 0 chance that they could do it. But Leicester got back to winning ways with a 3-0 win against Stoke, and then in their next game against Liverpool, Vardy would score twice, including this wonder goal.
He is chasing it, thinks about the shot first time. Oh, what a goal!
By this point, Leicester's title-winning odds were no longer 5,000 to 1, but still they were only placed at 5%, as very few believed the fairy tale could genuinely come true. But then, in the next game, Leicester took on their main title rivals, Manchester City, and defender Robert Huth scored right at the start before Mahrez doubled the lead, and Huth would score again as Leicester won 3-1 to now give them a 5-point lead at the top of the table. Leicester's next opponents were Arsenal, and while Vardy bagged yet another penalty to give the Foxes the lead, Theo Walcott equalized for the Gunners, and then disaster struck as Danny Welbeck scored a winner for Arsenal in the 95th minute. Suddenly, pressure was starting to build in the next game against Norwich, where Leicester struggled for long periods, but finally they scored a last-minute winner in the game, and after drawing against West Brom in their next game, the Foxes would win 5 games in a row and keep 5 clean sheets in the process, which must have cost Ranieri a fortune in pizza deliveries, as Leicester went from having a terrible defense at the start of the season to having the second best defense in the league. But Leicester's winning run would end in a 2-2 draw with West Ham, where Jamie Vardy would get sent off for diving.
Lovely touch to get himself going, and then he just brings his leg across his opponent and try and initiate the contact,
causing Captain Wes Morgan to say that the referee was clueless. But no Vardy doesn't mean no party for Leicester, as in their next game they battered Swansea 4-0 and then drew 1-1 with Manchester United, with Morgan getting the goal for Leicester. And now the stage was set. Leicester were on the brink of the most unlikely of seasons. They were so close to the Premier League title, and all they needed was one more win or a second-place Tottenham to drop points, and the title was theirs. Jamie Vardy decided to invite all the Leicester players to his house for a watch party as Spurs faced up against Chelsea, and Eden Hazard put on a masterclass to hand Leicester City the Premier League title. Yes, you heard me, Leicester City just won the Premier League title. They had the fourth lowest wage bill in the league, spent pennies in the summer, and were favorites to finish 20th, but somehow, against literally all the odds, Leicester City were the champions of England. They went on to draw one and win one of their final 2 games, closing the season off with just 3 losses as Jamie Vardy bagged 24 goals, announcing himself as arguably the deadliest striker in England. Riyad Mahrez scored 17 as he was named the Premier League Player of the Season, and the unlikeliest of heroes, N'Golo Kante, was now being considered as one of the greatest defensive midfielders in the world of football, as these 3 were the stars of this title-winning team. But Kante's importance was also spotted by Chelsea, who signed him that summer for £32 million, which is more than Leicester's total spend the season before. Arsenal also tried to sign Vardy, who stayed loyal to Leicester despite huge bids for him. And the next season, Gary Lineker kept his promise and presented Match of the Day in his underwear. But unfortunately for Leicester, their smaller budget started to show, as at one point they dropped as low as 17th in the league and actually ended up sacking Claudio Ranieri. The Foxes would recover to finish 12th, but the highlight of the next season would be their run in the Champions League, where they would finish top of a group featuring Porto, Copenhagen, and Club Brugge before beating Sevilla in the round of 16 to become the only English side that year to reach the quarterfinals. But a 1-0 loss away at Atletico Madrid and a 1-1 draw at home with Vardy scoring for Leicester meant that is as far as their fairy tale would go. Over the next few seasons, Danny Drinkwater would join Conte at Chelsea, where he would spend most of his time on the bench. Riyad Mahrez would make a £60 million move to Manchester City. Wes Morgan would retire in 2021, and Jamie Vardy would stay at Leicester all the way until 2025, where he won another major trophy in the FA Cup before Leicester began bouncing between relegation and promotion yet again, as it looked like the fairy tale story could not be repeated. But what a story it was. But now it's time for arguably the greatest manager in Premier League history, as this man built not 1, not 2, but 3 of the greatest sides the Premier League has ever seen. Over the course of 26 years, Manchester United won 38 trophies, as Sir Alex Ferguson built the greatest dynasty English football has ever seen. But how on earth did he do it? How did this man build super team after super team and keep reinventing himself to destroy every new challenge that came his way? This is the story of how Manchester United broke football for 26 years straight.
Can you believe it? The most dramatic finale!
Sir Alex Ferguson, he never gets tired of winning.
On the 6th of November 1986, Alex Ferguson was appointed manager of Manchester United as this insane story was about to kick off. But before we get to this season, it's important to understand the context of the club at the time, because Manchester United was struggling badly both on and off the pitch. They hadn't won a league title in almost 20 years, and their last major title was the European Cup all the way back in 1968 under the guidance of the legendary Sir Matt Busby. Every manager who followed had to face the huge expectations, but none could live up to them as they all crumbled under the pressure. Very similar to what is going on today. During the 70s, Manchester United then entered one of their darkest periods as they were relegated to the second division. And to make matters even worse, at this point, Liverpool were entering the most successful period in their club's history, winning title after title, both domestically and in Europe, picking up 11 league titles, 19 domestic cups, and 7 European trophies in just 20 years. Meanwhile, Manchester United lifted only 3 domestic cups in that same period. In the few seasons before Ferguson arrived, Manchester United actually had built a team with promise, but they lacked discipline, as there was a strong drinking culture going on inside the club. And after a very poor start to the 86-87 season, where Manchester United found themselves sitting just 1 spot from the bottom, they called in Alex Ferguson to steady the ship. But why him? Well, Ferguson had already been a top-flight manager for over a decade, having began his managerial career in 1974 at 32 years old by taking charge of St Mirren in the Scottish 2nd Division. After spending 4 years there and managing to get them promoted, he took charge of Aberdeen, where he was able to do the impossible in Scotland as his side toppled the Rangers and Celtic domination, becoming the first club to win the league besides those two in over 15 years. Even more impressively than that, he took Aberdeen to European glory, lifting the Cup Winners' Cup in 1983, defeating Bayern Munich along the way, and Real Madrid in the final. After this, Ferguson became a manager in demand, with both Arsenal and Spurs offering him a deal, but he had his eyes set on the Scotland national team. After 1 year in charge with Scotland and failing to qualify for the World Cup, Ferguson left his post there, and at the same time, Manchester United had sacked their manager. So, in November 1986, as they sat 21st in the English First Division, Ferguson was appointed the newest manager of Manchester United Football Club. So now, the scene is set. A 44-year-old Ferguson with fiery self-belief who was looking to start a revolution in England and bring glory back to Manchester. But this would be no easy task, and Ferguson's early years in Manchester would end up being the toughest of his entire career. When Ferguson arrived, the club had a bit of a culture shock. The stars in the team, such as Norman Whiteside, Paul McGrath, and Brian Robson, were used to a relaxed lifestyle where physical fitness took second priority and drinking and partying was a core part of their life. But this was not going to fly under Ferguson, as on day one, he sought to destroy this mentality. He believed in the importance of being professional both on and off the pitch, keeping fit and getting the edge in every way possible by consistently improving. Thanks to this mentality, Ferguson managed to lift United out of the relegation zone and finish the season in 11th place, which was respectable considering the position he started in. Now moving into his second season and his first full one in charge, Ferguson made several key signings in Steve Bruce, Viv Anderson, and Brian McClare, who helped United finish second place in the league, 9 points off first place Liverpool. This season also saw Brian McClare score 20 league goals, which made him the first United player to do that since George Best almost 20 years before. But just as things were starting to look positive for United, they would take a turn for the worse as they fell back into 11th place in Fergie's third season, despite signing Mark Hughes for a club record fee that season. By this point, Ferguson still hadn't managed to kill this drinking culture in the club, so it meant he had to be ruthless by getting rid of two key players in Norman Whiteside and Paul McGrath. This ruthless attitude Ferguson showed to players is something that is a constant throughout his career and something we'll be seeing a lot more of soon. But now, moving on into the 89-90 season, Ferguson made even further additions to the squad with Neil Webb, Mike Phelan, Paul Ince, and Gary Pallister all joining the team. But despite these additions, this season did not start well, with Manchester United getting humiliated by Man City 5-1 in what Ferguson describes as the lowest point of his entire career. The fans were starting to turn on him too, with banners being held out at games reading, 3 years of excuses and it's still crap, ta-ra Fergie. Both fans and journalists alike were calling for him to be sacked as things just kept getting worse. After going 7 games without a victory, United played an FA Cup third-round match against Nottingham Forest in a game that quite literally decided Fergie's future. It was understood that if he lost this game, he was getting the sack, but United walked away with a 1-0 victory thanks to a Mark Robins goal, and this is the game which is seen as the turning point in this story, as Manchester United went on to the final of the FA Cup, where Fergie's men defeated Crystal Palace 1-0 to land Ferguson his first major trophy as Manchester United manager. The following season saw a better domestic performance, finishing 6th place, but they rode the momentum of the FA Cup victory into Europe as they played in the European Cup Winners' Cup and made it to the final to play against Barcelona. But this was no regular Barcelona side, as it was Cruyff's so-called dream team. But still, Ferguson managed to get his men over the line as they won the final 2-1, handing United their first European trophy in over 20 years. Fergie was starting to win over all the doubters as there was hope brewing in Manchester, and he even went as far to claim that this team were ready to win the league title in the next season. This season also saw a 17-year-old Ryan Giggs make his debut for United, as he would soon become the most exciting talent in English football, making him the first of many young players Sir Alex Ferguson would introduce into the team, who would in turn propel him to glory. But for now, entering the 91-92 season, this was Ferguson's 6th season in charge, and he began by making 2 key signings in defender Paul Parker and the one and only Peter Schmeichel in goal. And these men would help Fergie take United to the 3rd season in a row lifting silverware, as United lifted the League Cup and the European Super Cup, but they still lost the league, and this time coming 2nd place to Leeds United, who had signed a Frenchman named Eric Cantona mid-season to propel them to the title, winning it on the final day. It was clear this United team were getting closer. There was just something missing up front, as it was a clear lack of goals in the second half of the season that cost them the league title, something that Ferguson would be looking to change next year as he sought to bring in a man to lead the line. And little did he know that the man he was going to select would be the catalyst that would propel this side to the very top of English football, as Ferguson was about finished forging his first super team and his domestic domination was about to kick off. English football had just changed forever as the new Premier League was formed, which meant there was a blank canvas where legacies were waiting to be written, and Manchester United were eager to make history. But this was now Ferguson's 7th season in charge of United, and as it stood, the club had gone 25 years without a league title. Currently, the record for English football titles was held by Liverpool with 18, whilst Manchester United trailed far behind with 7. But I want you to remember this statistic. It'll be important later on in the story. This Liverpool team was coming to an end of an era though, as key players had left the club and their era of dominance was coming to an end. Entering this season, Ferguson knew he needed a striker and chased down both Alan Shearer and David Hirst, but couldn't get his hands on either of them, instead settling for Dion Dublin as his new striker. But after just 3 games into the season, he broke his leg, leaving him out for the entire year. United had begun this season slow, and by November, they were sitting in 10th place as it looked like they'd be missing out on the league title yet again. But this is when something happened that would change the club's history forever, as Ferguson signed Eric Cantona from Leeds for a fee of £1.2 million. He was handed the number 7 jersey, and Ferguson finally had the missing piece to the puzzle. Cantona formed a strong striker partnership with Mark Hughes as they fixed United's goal issue for the previous season, but Cantona did more than just score goals. He inspired the team. He would ask Fergie to stay on to train extra, which prompted his teammates to do the same. He was an amazing player on the pitch, but an excellent character off it, which instilled hope in this team, and as the season progressed, they found themselves back in with a chance at the title. Come the 10th of April, Manchester United were in a 3-horse race with Aston Villa and Norwich, and it was a specific game against Sheffield Wednesday which decided everything, as United found themselves trailing with just 4 minutes left on the clock until Steve Bruce scored 2 late goals, the second being 7 minutes into stoppage time to give United the 3 points and propel them to the top of the league. This is where the famous Fergie time came about, and after this match, Manchester United would not lose that top position, as after a 26-year wait, Ferguson's men were crowned Premier League champions, writing their names in the history of English football. Ferguson had put some team together over recent years with the likes of Peter Schmeichel, Steve Bruce, Paul Ince, a 19-year-old wonder kid Ryan Giggs, and of course, King Eric Cantona. But they were not stopping here, as this was only just the start of their total English domination. In the following year, Manchester United brought a 22-year-old Roy Keane into the squad to replace the aging Brian Robson, and during this 93-94 season, they were completely dominant, leading the league from practically start to finish, picking up a 2nd title in a row. But even more than that, they lifted an FA Cup too, smashing Chelsea 4-0 in the final to make it a domestic double. Ryan Giggs was also developing fast, as by this point he was no longer just a wonder kid, but he was the star of the team. And of course, King Cantona proved yet again why he deserved that iconic number 7 shirt, as he scored 25 goals in the season. But just as things were going great for both Cantona and United, the 94-95 season would prove difficult, as this season was marked with a kung fu kick into the crowd in January, resulting in an 8-month ban from English football. The media was calling for Cantona's head after this, and this is when Fergie had a choice to make: leave Eric out to dry or stick by his man. And of course, Fergie stuck by him, as he loved Cantona and refused to throw him under the bus. This man management from Ferguson was something that he was the best in the world at. He knew exactly how to manage his players to get the best out of them on an individual level, and he knew that when Cantona would return, he would come back as good as ever. But for now, Man United were in a title race with Blackburn Rovers, whilst they were missing their main man. They signed the previous season's top scorer, Andy Cole, in the January transfer window, and he was able to help keep them afloat until the final game of the season, where Man United drew to West Ham, handing the title to Blackburn. But to make matters worse, a week later, they played the FA Cup final against Everton, where they were also beat, meaning Fergie's men ended this season trophyless. Despite this heartache, Ferguson had been planting seeds all year that were ready to sprout, as he had been integrating a group of young players into the side known as the Class of '92. Gary Neville, Paul Scholes, Ryan Giggs, Phil Neville, Nicky Butt, and David Beckham all made up this group of players, and rolling into the next season, Ferguson had a plan for these boys, but as usual, it was one that everyone would doubt.
The trick is always buy when you're strong, so he needs to buy players. You can't win anything with kids.
These comments were made by Liverpool legend Alan Hansen following United's opening day defeat to Aston Villa. But why was he saying this? Well, over the summer, Fergie had sold 3 major stars in Paul Ince, Mark Hughes, and Andrew Kanchelskis, but instead of replacing these with new signings, he decided to put his faith in youth, just like Sir Matt Busby had done over 30 years prior. This was part of Manchester United's DNA, but still, it was a major risk. Following this opening day defeat, Man United went on to win 5 in a row, and the side received an even bigger boost as Cantona returned in October to face Liverpool. United trailed the league all season, but with Cantona back in the squad, he led this team to the top of the Premier League yet again, as Newcastle United finished in second place. A week later, United played the FA Cup final against Liverpool, where of course Cantona scored the decisive goal to make it another double for Manchester United, and this meant that, contrary to Alan Hansen's beliefs, Manchester United did in fact win everything with kids, and these kids were only just getting better. At 21 years old, David Beckham opened the 96-97 season with a halfway line goal, which was the start of superstardom for the young winger. Beckham would only grow better from here, as he was quickly showing the world what he could do on that right wing with cross after cross, corner after corner, and free kick after free kick, all resulting in the same outcome: goals for Manchester United. At the start of this season, Ferguson also bolstered the squad, adding Ronnie Johnson and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, and all this did was strengthen the already dominant team, meaning yet again they were crowned Premier League champions for the 4th time in 5 seasons, and they also made it to the European Cup semi-final, which was their best attempt in over 26 years, showing clear signs of growth. But despite all this season ended with worry in Manchester for 2 different reasons. Firstly, Eric Cantona announced that he would be retiring from football at just 30 years of age, as he felt he was being exploited by Manchester United's merchandising department. And secondly, there was a new manager in the Premier League taking charge of Arsenal Football Club, who was about to take the league by storm, as Ferguson's Manchester United were about to enter a completely new era and would go from the high of this season to the lows of defeat, but then to the pinnacle of European football. After Cantona left United, Ferguson had some holes to fill, so he signed a replacement striker in Teddy Sheringham to make up for the goals they were losing with Eric. He handed the number 7 jersey to David Beckham, solidifying his place as the star in the team, and gave the captain's armband to Roy Keane, as he stated he had all the right ingredients to succeed from the Frenchman. Interestingly, at this point, Keane and Beckham were the 2 men Ferguson placed such trust in, and they are 2 men whom he would fall out with so badly as the years would go by. For now though, United were on a 7-month unbeaten run, which was ended by Leeds United in September 1997, but this match saw an even bigger blow, as newly appointed captain Roy Keane suffered a season-ending injury at the hands of Alfie Inge Haaland. Yes, Erling Haaland's father. Despite the loss of their captain, Man United marched into the new year sitting 11 points above second-place Arsenal, but as the year turned, Arsene Wenger's side won every single game until May 3rd, when they defeated Everton, naming Arsenal Premier League champions, meaning Ferguson's men tasted the rare and bitter feeling of defeat. I think it's good for my young players to lose on this occasion. I wholeheartedly acknowledge what Arsenal achieved between Christmas and the end of the season. These are the words Ferguson spoke after this season, and within just 1 year, he'd be proven right. His players were angry. He was angry. There was a new team in town that were taking all the headlines, playing a more attractive style of football, but this was exactly what this team needed. It created a siege mentality in the squad, and this is what propelled them to achieve immortality in the very next season.
Beckham into Sheringham, and Solskjaer has won it!
1988-1999. What a season. So let's start from the beginning. Ferguson made 2 marquee signings this year in defender Jaap Stam and striker Dwight Yorke. who was signed just minutes before the deadline to submit the squads for that year's Champions League. With these two additions to the squad, Ferguson had pretty much a perfect team. Every position had a specialist, and there was such a synergy within this squad. Schmeichel was the heroic goalkeeper in net, Jaap Stam and Ronnie Johnson marshaled the defense as the center-back pairing. Dennis Irwin played as the left back, and Gary Neville as the right back. The midfield two consisted of Roy Keane as the box-to-box destroyer and Paul Scholes as the deep-lying playmaker. On the left, there was Ryan Giggs, whose explosive pace and dribbling ability would cause major problems to defenders. On the right, there was the magnificent David Beckham, who was reaching the peak of his powers as everything he would touch would turn to goal. And then finally, York and Cole made up the deadliest striker partnership in all of Europe, as together they caused nightmares for opposing defenses with their telepathic relationship. This was Fergie's go-to starting lineup, but when he needed to rotate, he definitely had the players for it, with the likes of Solskjaer, Sheringham, Blomqvist, Brown, Butt, and Neville all rotating in and out of the team. Ferguson had crafted a super team, but despite that, the season did not start well with an opening 3-0 defeat to Arsenal in the Charity Shield. This season would also start in a scary manner in Europe, as Manchester United were drawn in the group of death, consisting of Barcelona and Bayern Munich. But with 4 draws and 2 wins, Man United managed to come second and progress to the knockout stages. Things also started shaky in the FA Cup, where in just the 4th round they were drawn against Liverpool and were trailing all the way until the 86th minute, where thankfully they equalized, and then in stoppage time, Solskjaer cropped up and won the match, and this Fergie time winner would become the story of the entire season. As the league season progressed, United found themselves topping the table with Arsenal chasing, meaning the league would go down to the final day of the season, and in the end, Manchester United were crowned victors, topping the table by a single point, claiming their first trophy of the season. Now taking a look at the FA Cup, the semi-final was one of the most dramatic games of the year, as United played against Arsenal, where the game finished 0-0, meaning they would be decided in a replay match. And come this game, everything looked bleak for United, as Keane was sent off, and late into the match, Arsenal won a penalty, but a hero was born in Peter Schmeichel, as this penalty was saved. And then, come extra time, Ryan Giggs scored one of the greatest goals of his career, running the entire length of the pitch and putting the ball into the back of the net to send United to the final, where they defeated Newcastle United 2-0 to make it a domestic double yet again. But this season was different. Fergie's men were not only competing on the domestic level, but in Europe too, as they crafted one of football's greatest ever stories. They defeated Inter Milan 3-1 in the quarterfinal, just become immortal, and Ferguson had 3 words to sum this all up: football, bloody hell. After this night in Barcelona, the team returned to Manchester to a crowd of 500,000 fans to tour the city, and Alex Ferguson was now named Sir Alex Ferguson for achieving the impossible dream. But as much as you would expect this team to take their foot off the gas following a season like this, Sir Alex would not let them, as they were heading into the 99-2000 season hungrier than ever to fight for the lot once again. Following the treble, Peter Schmeichel left the club after 8 seasons, but would soon tarnish his United legacy by signing for Manchester City a couple years later. In the league, United were yet again able to fight off Wenger's Arsenal, as they lifted a 2nd Premier League title in a row with only 3 defeats in the entire season and a record margin of 18 points. Fergie's men also lifted the Intercontinental Cup in Tokyo, but unfortunately, they could not recreate their European success as they did in the previous season, getting knocked out of the Champions League by eventual winners Real Madrid in only the quarterfinals. Now, roll on to the 2000-2001 season, and Fergie made 2 key signings in Veron and Van Nistelrooy, and his men came back once more to lift a 3rd Premier League title in a row, becoming only the 4th team in English football history to do so. This season also saw Roy Keane get his revenge on Alfie Inge Haaland, as they met for the first time since Keane's injury, and Keane quite literally ended Haaland's career on the spot with one of the most brutal tackles in football history, which sent the man into an early retirement. But as much as Manchester United were dominating this season, there were big doubts surrounding the club all year, as Sir Alex Ferguson had announced he'll be retiring from management following the season. He would eventually backtrack on his decision and choose to stay, but as he did this, problems were brewing in Manchester. His treble-winning side that was dominating football would soon start to fall apart. The Premier League would soon face new threats with newer challengers cropping up, and Sir Alex was about to go through one of the darkest periods in his United tenure, as he would have to completely rebuild this team whilst the fan base would slowly start to turn on the man who had already given them so much success. The next 5 years in Manchester would prove difficult for Ferguson and his men. His treble team would slowly fall apart, but as you know, he would start building something great once again as he would slowly start laying the foundations for his next super team. The 01-02 season started with Ferguson selling star defender Jaap Stam to Lazio, but looking back at this decision, Sir Alex describes it as the biggest mistake during his entire time at Manchester United. The team went through a poor first half of the season, and by December, they sat in 9th place in the Premier League. They were also knocked out early from the League Cup and the FA Cup, meaning that this season would prove to be a total failure as Arsenal were eventually crowned Premier League champions. The shining light this season was the arrival of Ruud van Nistelrooy, who quickly announced himself as one of the best strikers in the Premier League, but still, the team underperformed on all fronts this year. Heading into the 02-03 season, Manchester United were still in search of that Jaap Stam replacement and decided to break the transfer record for a defender, signing Rio Ferdinand to the club for £29 million. But still, the team started the season poorly yet again. After this rough start, Ferguson was given a lot of criticism until he replied with one of his most iconic quotes, "I don't get paid to panic. We've had plenty of stuttering starts. My greatest challenge is not what's happening at the moment. My greatest challenge was knocking Liverpool right off their fucking perch, and you can print that." By the end of the season, Ferguson's men would in fact be sitting on top of the Premier League, meaning he was proven right. But as this season drew to a close, there was major controversy going on in the dressing room, specifically around the biggest star at the club, David Beckham. But what happened? Sir Alex had been growing increasingly weary of Beckham's superstar status, which meant tensions were already high between the two, but things reached their boiling point when Ferguson walked into the dressing room and kicked a boot out of anger. This boot went hurling into Beckham's face, cutting him, and despite this being an accident, it hit the media headlines, and the next thing you know, Beckham was being sold to Real Madrid after spending his entire life at Manchester United and cementing his legacy as one of United's great number 7s. It's interesting to see how the number 7 at United has developed over the years. George Best, Brian Robson, Eric Cantona, and David Beckham all don the iconic jersey and all left everlasting legacies at the club, and now the number 7 jersey was yet again up for grabs, meaning a new legacy was left to be written. On the 12th of August 2003, Sir Alex Ferguson signed an 18-year-old Portuguese winger from Sporting Lisbon and saw something extremely special within the boy from the very start, so much so that he gave him the number 7 jersey on day 1. But Ronaldo's early years at United would be raw. He would still have a lot of learning to do before he became the best player in the world, as he was all tricks and less end product at the moment. But entering the 03-04 season, Manchester United were now truly in a transitional period and in dire need of a rebuild, to the point that they would go the next 3 years in a row without a Premier League title. But these years would come with controversy and drama throughout. In December of this 03-04 season, Rio Ferdinand was handed an 8-month ban from football for missing a drug test. He took the test later that day and returned negative results, but regardless, they banned him for missing the original time slot. Without Ferdinand in the team, United fell from the top of the league to 3rd as Arsenal lifted the title, ending this year invincible, becoming the only Premier League team to ever do this. United did manage to lift the FA Cup, beating Millwall 3-0 in the final, but also got knocked out of the Champions League early as Mourinho's Porto knocked them out, as this was just a sign of what the Premier League was about to experience in the coming years. As the 04-05 season began, Mourinho joined Chelsea, and now the league was pretty much a 3-horse race: Wenger, Ferguson, and Mourinho. Sir Alex began the year off by signing an 18-year-old Wayne Rooney from Everton, as he was truly the most exciting young player in football at the time. Ronaldo was also growing more in this team by putting in more and more match-winning performances. But still, this team did not perform this year. They spent the majority of the season without the main man Van Nistelrooy due to injury, and they underperformed in all competitions as Chelsea lifted the league title with record-breaking points, leaving United in 3rd place. Arsenal lifted the FA Cup, beating United in the final. A second-round exit from the Champions League and a semi-final exit from the League Cup meant they ended this season trophyless, whilst Mourinho and Wenger were the talk of Premier League football, something that Manchester United fans were definitely not happy about. Now roll on to the 05-06 season, and things did not get much better. The Glazers completed their takeover of Manchester United, as the club was now placed under corporate American ownership. And yet again this year, Manchester United failed to lift the Premier League title, making that only one in the last 5 seasons, and they also failed to qualify for the Champions League knockout rounds this year, which was just piling more and more pressure on the club. This season provided for more transition as, whilst people were losing hope in Fergie, he knew what he was building. In November, Captain Roy Keane left the club after his contract ended and a falling out with the manager. But in the transfer window this year, Ferguson made 4 key signings that would propel him to glory in the coming years. These being Ji-sung Park, Edwin van der Sar, Patrice Evra, and Nemanja Vidic, as Sir Alex Ferguson was just putting the final pieces of the puzzle in place for yet another super team, as his Manchester United side were now finally ready to take back their rightful place as the best team in England and soon the best team in all of Europe. Following these recent years, Ferguson was now being doubted as he was being attacked on all fronts. Fans and media alike were turning their backs on him, with one particular headline reading, "Shredding his legacy at every turn." But little did they know that everything was about to change. As the 06-07 season began, Michael Carrick signed for Manchester United to take the place of Roy Keane, and by this point, the only 5 players remained in the squad from that treble-winning side, those being Neville, Giggs, Scholes, Solskjaer, and Brown, meaning the team rebuild was pretty much complete. This season, United set the pace early in the Premier League, and from the 10th match till the final game of the season, they remained top, which put an end to this new Jose era of dominance, preventing him from winning 3 in a row. Rooney and Ronaldo had grown into the deadliest attacking duo in world football, as Ronaldo had now become the standout player in the Premier League, becoming the only player to ever win the Young Player of the Year award and the Player of the Year award at the same time. The old boys like Scholes and Giggs were also integral this season, as they both received Player of the Year nominations too. But despite this league success, United fell short in the Champions League, getting knocked out in the semi-finals by AC Milan, and they also lost the FA Cup final to Chelsea. But within just one season, both of these 2 defeats would be rectified, as they would get revenge on Chelsea to lift an even bigger prize. Okay, now here we are. The 07-08 season and this Manchester United side were now better than ever before, and they were about to write history yet again. Ferguson opened up the season by signing 3 players in Nani, Anderson, and Tevez to finalize this super team that had lined up in this general formation. Van der Sar and net, as Man United finally found their long-term Peter Schmeichel replacement. A completely dominant defensive duo with Rio Ferdinand as the ball player and Nemanja Vidic as the monster in the back. Patrice Evra on the left, Brown on the right, who filled in for the injured Gary Neville. Carrick and Scholes created a perfect midfield too. Giggs and Nani rotated in off the left, the magnificent Cristiano Ronaldo played off the right, and the front 2 consisted of Tevez and Rooney, who would often interchange with Ronaldo to create a liquid attacking unit. Okay, so that's the squad. Now let's talk about the football. United actually suffered their worst start to a Premier League season under Ferguson, as they drew their first 2 games and lost the 3rd against Manchester City, and even their main man Ronaldo was slow to get going, not scoring his first Premier League goal until the 8th game of the season. But of course, United clicked into gear, and so did Ronaldo, as they started to score goals for fun. As the season progressed, the title race emerged between Man United, Arsenal, and Chelsea, but thanks to the sheer talent Man United had in their squad, they finished the league in first place, landing them their 2nd title in a row. Cristiano Ronaldo was named as the player of the season yet again, as he broke the Premier League goal-scoring record with 31 goals for the season. But a Premier League title for Manchester United isn't too crazy. But when we turn to Europe, then this story definitely gets taken to a whole new level. They topped their Champions League group with 5 wins and a draw as they went flying into the round of 16 to face Lyon. They played out the tie to a 2-1 victory and progressed to the quarterfinals, where they calmly moved past Roma, landing them a spot in the last 4. 0-0 away at the Camp Nou meant it was all to play for at Old Trafford, and Paul Scholes was the man to step up and score the only goal of the match to send Manchester United to the Champions League final against Chelsea. The match finished level at 1-1 thanks to a Ronaldo header, but as this game progressed to extra time and eventually penalties, things got very intense. Cristiano Ronaldo, the best player in the world, stepped up and missed, but the stars aligned for United when John Terry slipped, hitting the post with his penalty. United then took charge of the shootout and Van der Sar became the savior as he saved the final penalty and granted Fergie his second Champions League winner's medal. Cristiano Ronaldo finished the season with 42 goals in 49 appearances, which earned him the Ballon d'Or, officially naming him the best player in the world. But the problem here was that as much as he loved United and Fergie, he had dreams to play in Madrid, but thanks to some convincing, Ferguson got him to stay for one more year, where United were going to go for the lot once again, as this super team was not ready yet. Man United began the 08-09 season by signing Dimitar Berbatov to make their attacking unit even more complete, and this year Liverpool emerged as the title challengers, but nevertheless, United came out on top once again, finishing the season with 90 points, 4 clear of Liverpool, and now this title meant something extremely significant in English football, as it was United's 18th, meaning they now matched Liverpool's record of 18 titles, all within Fergie's tenure in charge. This season saw Nemanja Vidic win the Premier League Player of the Season award, which is a remarkable feat to do as a defender, but despite these achievements, the year ended bitter in Manchester as they made it all the way to the Champions League final yet again, but this time, Fergie's men were simply outclassed by Guardiola's Barcelona and, in particular, Lionel Messi, and this would be the final game Ronaldo would play for United, as shortly after this defeat, he was announced as the new world record signing for Real Madrid, as this Manchester United era was coming to an end, especially with new, noisy challengers cropping up in the Premier League. But Fergie was not done quite yet, as he, despite matching Liverpool's 18 titles, he still had to beat it and truly knock them off their perch, as he believed the job was not yet finished. Sir Alex Ferguson was now entering his 24th year as Manchester United manager, and with the recent departure of Ronaldo and Tevez, he was entering yet another era with this team, able to put Manchester United on the very top of English football history. But unfortunately, the 09-10 season would not be that year, as this Manchester United team were beaten to the title by a single point and were also knocked out of the Champions League by Bayern Munich in the quarterfinals. Wayne Rooney was the main man at this point, picking up 34 goals for the season, with the second top scorer being Berbatov with only 12. But as much as this season ended trophyless, in the 2010-11 season, Ferguson would finally get his way as they stormed the league, going unbeaten all the way until February, and then sealing the league with a 9-point gap over second-place Chelsea, meaning Sir Alex Ferguson had officially knocked Liverpool right off their perch. Looking over to Europe, though, the season ended in déjà vu, as Manchester United reached the final and yet again were beaten by Barcelona, this time 3-1, as Sir Alex Ferguson had now lost his second final in 3 years. The goal threat had been much more spread this season, as United had 4 players all reach double figures for goals at Berbatov, Rooney, Hernandez, and Nani, and yet again, Nemanja Vidic was named the Premier League Player of the Season, as he was such a rock at the back. Now at this point in time, Manchester had been a one-team city, with United dominating football over their rivals Manchester City, but over the past couple years, Man City had a takeover, and they had been slowly building a team to compete at the very top, and entering the 2011-12 season, they were finally ready to paint the city blue, as this would prove to be one of the most dramatic seasons in football history. Heading into this season, Edwin van der Sar, Gary Neville, and Paul Scholes all retired from professional football, leaving only Ryan Giggs remaining from the old guard, and this year was all about Manchester. Which Manchester? Well, that was decided in the dying moments of the season, because with only one game to play, Man United and Man City sat level on points, but City had a significantly better goal difference, meaning the title was in City's hands. Come full time, United did everything they could, as Rooney scored the only goal in a 1-0 victory over Sunderland, but when the whistle blew, Man City were still playing their match and trailing until Dzeko leveled it, and then, with just seconds left on the clock,
Balotelli! Aguero! Staggering!
Just like that, Ferguson lost the title to his City rivals, and what stung the most was that earlier in the season, Manchester United lost 6-1 to Manchester City, which swung the goal difference in Man City's favor and handed them the trophy in the end. Many believe that if he had won the title, he would have retired this season, but there was no way this man was going to go out like this, so he got his team ready for one last go to regain the Premier League and paint Manchester red once more as he entered his final season in charge of Manchester United Football Club. Fergie knew that to go out with a bang, he needed one more star man to join the side, and who better than the current Premier League Golden Boot winner, Robin van Persie. And what a signing he was, as he scored 26 Premier League goals to win a second Golden Boot in a row, and of course, propel Manchester United to their 20th Premier League title. Ferguson also had to call on an old friend in Paul Scholes to come out of retirement this season in order to help the team in the back end, and this led to United confirming the league title with 4 games to spare, having led the league all the way from November till the very end. On the 19th of May, with the title already in hand, Sir Alex Ferguson walked out to his final ever match in charge of Manchester United as they played against West Brom, and this was played out to a 5-all draw and a perfect thriller of a finale to what is one of the greatest stories in football history. 10 Community Shields, 4 League Cups, 5 FA Cups, 1 European Cup Winners' Cup, 2 Champions League trophies, 13 Premier League titles, and, most importantly of all, he knocked Liverpool right off their fucking perch. Sir Alex Ferguson, you legend. But as much as we've just covered, you've heard about the story of Arsenal under Wenger. I don't think you quite know exactly how remarkable it was. So now, let me tell you all about it. Do you know how difficult it is to go an entire football season without losing a game? In modern football, the top 5 leagues have only seen this happen 3 times. Xabi Alonso's Leverkusen, Antonio Conte's Juventus, and, well, Arsene Wenger's Arsenal. And if you look at the entire history of English football, there's only one other team who was able to do this, that being Preston North End in 1889, over 130 years ago. But what makes this even more remarkable is the period of football Wenger did it in, because Arsenal were not the dominant force in England, as this was done right in the middle of Sir Alex Ferguson's reign of English football, making this an almost impossible task. But somehow, a nerdy manager from France was able to assemble one of the greatest squads in football history to complete the most impossible season in English history. So the question remains, how on earth was this possible? Well, to understand that, we have to start this story right before Arsene Wenger arrived in London, because Arsenal was in a strange situation. You see, Arsenal were one of the biggest clubs in the country, and through the late 80s and early 90s, they were led by manager George Graham, who became one of their greatest coaches, leading Arsenal to a famous 1989 league title where they beat Liverpool 2-0 on the final day of the season to win the league for the first time in almost 2 decades. Graham also went on to win the European Cup Winners' Cup in 1994, beating Parma in the final. But as much as we know Wenger's Arsenal for beautiful attacking football, this team played in a very different style. Simply put, it was boring, as it was built around the most solid defense in England that in one season conceded just 18 goals, with England national team goalkeeper David Seaman behind a back four of Lee Dixon, Martin Keown, Nigel Winterburn, and club captain Tony Adams. This team had perfected the offside trap that would often win games by just a single goal, usually scored by Ian Wright, whilst their rivals would chant, "Boring, boring Arsenal." But that boredom soon turned into scandal, as George Graham was found to have taken an illegal payment from an agent to sign their player, meaning he was banned from football for a year and sacked by Arsenal in 1995. Then entered Bruce Rioch, who took charge for a year before getting the sack in 1996, ending an unremarkable time with the Gunners. Now at this time, the Premier League was turning into a dynasty, as Alex Ferguson had now won 4 out of the last 5 league titles with Manchester United, and Arsenal fans were not enjoying this. The fans demanded a top coach from the Premier League, the Serie A or La Liga, to come in to bring them glory. But shockingly, they ended up hiring a manager whose last job had been in Japan. Arsene Wenger had a rather unremarkable playing career, but had made his name as manager of Monaco, where he won the French League in 1989, and reached the 1992 Cup Winners' Cup final and even the semi-final of the Champions League. At this time, he met with Arsenal's vice chairman David Dane and became good friends, but despite having plenty of offers from other European sides, Wenger decided his next job would be in Japan, where he took over the worst side in the J-League, Nagoya Grampus 8, who had just finished bottom of the league. But Wenger changed the club's philosophy, making them think for themselves on the pitch, and their form turned around with Nagoya going on a winning run to finish second in the J-League, winning the Emperor's Cup and the Japanese Super Cup. And so David Dean pushed Arsenal's board to hire him, and eventually after Rioch's failure, the board agreed and decided to bring Arsene Wenger back from Japan to North London to become the first Frenchman to ever manage in the Premier League. But instantly, question marks arose about this French manager with his nerdy look landing in England. Was he really capable of fighting back against Ferguson's unstoppable Man United? And was he capable of turning a boring Arsenal into something better? Wenger wasn't the only Frenchman to arrive at Highbury in 1996, as he approved the signing of Rémi Gaudet and Patrick Vieira that summer, ready for his arrival with French striker Nicolas Anelka also joining the following January. But the start of the 96-97 season was pure chaos, as Rioch was sacked just before the start of the season, and Wenger was still under contract at Nagoya, so couldn't actually join Arsenal until late September, and lots of media outlets were questioning his CV and whether Le Professeur could adapt to English football. Wenger's first game in charge didn't come until October, when Arsenal beat Blackburn Rovers 2-0, playing with a 3-5-2 formation with Vieira at the base of the midfield alongside Paul Merson and David Platt. And then in Wenger's third game in charge, he came up against former Arsenal manager George Graham, who had finished his ban and was now at Leeds United. But a 3-0 win with early goals from Dixon and Bergkamp showed without a doubt that Wenger was now the big man at Highbury. And while Wenger often still played with the back four, he looked to play a more possession-based, fluid style of football. And the Frenchman also set about changing Arsenal's culture, making sure that there was competition for places in the first team so everyone was always on their toes. He also made huge changes to the players' fitness and diets, including pushing players to eat healthy foods and avoid red meat or junk food, and even removed Mars bars from the dressing room. But more than that, he sought to end the boozy drinking culture at Arsenal, whose stars like Tony Adams and Paul Merson had been afflicted by alcohol problems, by banning the players from drinking together, saying, "I don't see how a player who drinks regularly can survive in football." Adams said that Wenger helped him quit alcohol altogether, and Wenger even went further, encouraging players to get injections of vitamins and creatine to help their recovery, as he did everything possible to make sure his players were at the top of their game. Wenger was a football obsessive, and despite initial doubts from the players, the start under Wenger was red hot, and Arsenal even climbed to the top of the Premier League by mid-December, until crucial losses to Liverpool and Newcastle later in the season meant that, despite having the league's tightest defense, the Gunners finished third. But this was only just the start of something great that Wenger was building. That summer, Wenger added even more French players to his dressing room as he revamped his midfield, concluding that there wasn't enough creativity there to score the goals needed the previous season. So Paul Merson was sold to Middlesbrough, and Emmanuel Petit was one of the 3 players who joined from Monaco, with Arsenal also adding Dutch wizard Mark Overmars from Ajax for £7 million. And Arsenal started the 97-98 season on fire, going unbeaten in their first 12 games, including a 4-0 thrashing of West Ham, a 4-1 win over Bolton, and a 5-0 demolition on Barnsley that briefly put them top of the league, with Ian Wright banging in 9 goals, including a hat-trick against Bolton, and Dennis Bergkamp scoring 10, including a hat-trick against Leicester. But then the wheels came off, as Arsenal started November with a 3-0 loss against Derby. The next game was a powerhouse showdown against Manchester United, and while Arsenal went 2-0 up at home, United pegged them back to 2-2 before David Platt scored with a header late in the game to win it for Arsenal. Alex Ferguson came out after the match to say the result meant that the title race was not just a one-horse race for Manchester United, as he accepted this was going to be a battle between his United and Wenger's Arsenal for the league title that season. But that win would be Arsenal's only win in November, and a poor run of 4 losses from 6 games before Christmas saw Arsenal slide down the league to as low as 6th in the table, and by the start of January, Arsenal were already 12 points behind Manchester United. But boring Arsenal were back, as the Gunners kept a league record 8 clean sheets in a row, with their defense as solid as a rock. And amid that run was another clash against Manchester United, where Arsenal kept the likes of Andy Cole, Teddy Sheringham, and David Beckham quiet for 90 minutes, and Mark Overmars scored the only goal of the game for the Gunners to win 1-0, meaning the title race was back on. Ferguson, moaning about fixture congestion, claimed Wenger knew nothing about English football and said it was inevitable that Arsenal would drop points. But Arsenal just kept winning, and in April, they thumped Wimbledon 5-0 to go top of the Premier League. And somehow, they just kept on going, winning 10 matches in a row, and on May 3rd, in front of a packed Highbury crowd, Arsenal beat Everton 4-0 to become only the 3rd team since the start of the Premier League to lift the league's trophy, and Arsene Wenger made history as the first non-British manager to lead a team to win the league, and somehow managing to dethrone the great Alex Ferguson. If the Premier League title wasn't enough, Arsenal had found themselves in an FA Cup final after scraping past Port Vale in the 3rd round, before beating Middlesbrough, Palace, and West Ham to play Newcastle in the final. Overmars and Nicola Anelka got the goals as Arsenal won 2-0 to complete the double of winning the league and the FA Cup to cap off a glorious season. Now, these two titles truly marked a change in English football, as Wenger brought something different to the game. He made his teams play elegant football with foreign flair, but as impressive as he was this season, the very best was still yet to come. Despite just winning a title, Arsenal needed to also rebuild, with club record scorer Ian Wright leaving for West Ham and David Platt retiring. And this is when Wenger really started to make the squad his own, bringing in Freddie Ljungberg and Nwankwo Kanu as their replacements. And this new era started in emphatic fashion as Arsenal took on rivals Manchester United in the Charity Shield and won the game 3-0 to become the first team from the south of England to win the Charity Shield since the 1960s. The two sides would be neck and neck all through the 98-99 season, as Arsenal once again struggled in November but picked up form after Christmas, going undefeated from December 20th until May to go top of the table with just 5 games left. In the FA Cup, Arsenal faced Manchester United in the semi-final in a clash of the Titans, and the pair drew 0-0, so the match was replayed, and this time Beckham scored first for United before Bergkamp equalized. But right at the end, Manchester United's Roy Keane got sent off, and Arsenal got a penalty. Bergkamp missed from 12 yards, so the match went to extra time, and Ryan Giggs scored a wonder goal to win the match for United, causing fans to invade the pitch, as Wenger described this defeat as a trauma. United's momentum then took them over the line, as Arsenal lost 1-0 to Leeds, and United won the Premier League by a single point, and even went on to win the Champions League, making for a treble-winning season, as Alex Ferguson had truly reclaimed his throne, meaning heading into that summer, Wenger had some work to do. Arsenal sold Nicola Anelka to Real Madrid for almost £25 million and replaced him with Davor Šuker and one other player from Juventus called Thierry Henry. This signing was good at the time, but nobody, and I mean nobody, had an idea of quite the terror Henry was about to impose on English football, because Thierry had struggled at Juventus and didn't score in his first 8 games at Arsenal, as he had difficulty adapting to the English game. But Arsene Wenger was absolutely convinced that Henry was something special, that he had the va-va-voom. But while Manchester United ran away with the 1999-2000 season, Arsenal had better luck in the UEFA Cup, beating Werder Bremen in the quarterfinals and Lyon in the semis to reach the final in Copenhagen against Turkish side Galatasaray. Unfortunately, the match finished 0-0 and went to penalties, and Davor Šuker and Patrick Vieira missed their spot kicks, and Wenger missed out on European glory. So, Šuker left Arsenal that summer, along with Overmars and Petit, who both moved to Barcelona in a double swoop, replaced by Edu and Robert Pire. The following season was once again dominated by United, and although Thierry Henry scored this wonder goal, chipping the ball up, then lobbing the goalkeeper for possibly the best of his career to beat United at Highbury, the Red Devils humiliated Arsenal 6-1 at Old Trafford later in the season to effectively win the title. But Ferguson had now angered Arsene Wenger by attempting to sign Arsenal's star midfielder Patrick Vieira without contacting Arsenal first, and this just added fuel to the fire growing inside of Arsene Wenger. But in the summer of 2001, Arsenal would make a shocking transfer of their own as Wenger realized he needed to strengthen his defense, so he signed England national team defender Sol Campbell, who made the unheard-of move across North London from Arsenal's rivals Tottenham Hotspur. And the surprise move was announced by Sol Campbell walking into a press conference for the signing of a reserve goalkeeper, completely unannounced to the shock of the journalists present, despite previously saying he would never play for Arsenal. Tottenham fans called him Judas, although can anyone really blame him for wanting to leave Spurs? Arsenal had an inconsistent start to the season, with a defeat against Leeds, sandwiched between 4-0 wins against Middlesbrough and Leicester, and, in typical fashion, there was a November slump with Arsenal on a run of 4 games without a win, when the champions Manchester United came to Highbury and 2 awful mistakes by United goalkeeper Fabien Barthez gifted Arsenal the win. But after losing to Newcastle in December, Arsenal turned on the style after Christmas, going unbeaten for the rest of the season and playing some dazzling football, including this incredible goal of the season by Dennis Bergkamp against Newcastle. And after a draw against Southampton in February, Arsenal won 13 games in a row, including a 1-0 win over Manchester United to win Arsene Wenger's second Premier League title, with Thierry Henry, the main man for Arsenal, scoring 32 goals in all competitions. But it was Ljungberg and Pire who won the Player of the Season awards, and Arsenal's triumph caused Wenger to say there had been a power shift in the league. And like with Wenger's previous league win, Arsenal did the double, lifting the FA Cup after beating Chelsea 2-0 in the final. But yet again, as great as this season was, the true magic was still yet to come for the Gunners. That summer saw the last of the old guard leave as Lee Dixon and Tony Adams retired and Patrick Vieira was given the captain's armband. And after going 29 games without being beaten at the end of the previous season, Arsenal started the 02-03 season strongly, going unbeaten in August and September to stretch that unbeaten run even further, leading Wenger to suggest that Arsenal could go a whole season unbeaten. But while lots of teams have won the title by losing just 1 or 2 games a season, the jump from 2 defeats a season to 0 defeats is absolutely enormous, as just one mistake in one game can end your hopes of a perfect season. And in 02-03, Arsenal looked to be heading toward a 1-1 draw with Everton when, in the last minute, Wayne Rooney scored for the Toffees, and Wenger's dream of being invincible went up in smoke. Arsenal lost the next game too, but from mid-December, Arsenal went on another unbeaten run that saw them go 8 points clear at the top of the league and knocked Manchester United out of the FA Cup with a 2-0 win at Old Trafford. Manchester United came back strong, and despite a bruising 2-2 draw between the clubs, where Sol Campbell got sent off for elbowing a United player and Patrick Vieira got injured, the momentum was with the Manchester side, who ended up finishing 5 points ahead of Arsenal to lift the Premier League. The Gunners did win the FA Cup, beating Southampton 1-0 in the final, but Wenger was not happy at all, and he also saw how money effectively decided the league, complaining that every summer Manchester United buy a £30 million player, and now even Chelsea were also starting to spend big money under new owner Roman Abramovich, whereas Arsenal had been signing young players with lots of potential. Unfortunately for Wenger, that was the story of his entire career at Arsenal, and sometimes he doesn't get the credit he deserves for achieving what he did with his restricted budget. Come the next season, and Arsenal looked to strengthen in goal, where they brought in Jens Lehmann from Borussia Dortmund to replace David Seaman, and just like that, Wenger had the final piece of the puzzle in completing arguably the greatest team in English history. And this team was magical, to say the least. I mean, Lehmann in goal, Sol Campbell and Kolo Touré as the center-back duo, Laurent on the right, and the magnificent Cole on the left of defense. A midfield duo of Vieira and Gilberto Silva with Pire and Ljungberg on the wings, and of course, the magical Bergkamp and the frightening Henry leading the line. Safe to say, this team was stacked. Arsenal started the 03-04 season well, winning 4 in a row and drawing their 5th game. But next up was a trip to Old Trafford to take on the champions Manchester United, and this encounter was even more feisty than usual, as Arsenal's Patrick Vieira was sent off in the 80th minute, and then, in the last minute, Arsenal's perfect start was dealt a devastating blow, as Manchester United were given a penalty, which Ruud van Nistelrooy took and smashed it against the crossbar. Arsenal hung on to draw 0-0, but after the game, several Arsenal players confronted Van Nistelrooy, and the FA charged Arsenal with improper conduct and gave the club a huge fine, as well as banning several players for a few games. In the next game against Newcastle, Vieira got injured again and would miss 2 months of games, and Arsenal's style this season had been grittier than before, grinding out results without the flair of previous seasons as they battled a newly minted Chelsea for first place, with Wenger saying that even though Chelsea had a bigger squad, his team was tight-knit and had been together for years. But 3 draws in 4 games saw Arsenal drop behind Manchester United, and the Gunners started January in 2nd place. But interestingly, they had yet to be beaten all season. Wenger decided to strengthen Arsenal's attack by signing Jose Antonio Reyes from Sevilla for £10 million, but it was Thierry Henry who was unstoppable, scoring clever goals like a quickly taken free kick against Aston Villa to wonder strikes against Wolves, as Arsenal had now gone 24 games unbeaten, setting a new club record for the longest unbeaten start to a season. And in February, Thierry Henry scored his 100th goal for the club, who were now top of the table. But their winning run came under threat when Arsenal traveled to Stamford Bridge, where Chelsea scored in the first minute of the game. But Arsenal fought back and won 2-1. And then, at the end of March, Arsenal took on Manchester United again and opened the scoring with a pile-driver long-range goal from Thierry Henry, finishing the match 1-1, which meant the title was basically in the bag. Arsenal were still unbeaten in the league with just 8 games left to play, and Henry was on top form as he scored a hat-trick in the next game, which was a 4-2 win over Liverpool, and a week later scored 4 goals against Leeds. But something magical was about to happen because the stars well and truly aligned for every Arsenal fan around the world. Because next up was Tottenham Hotspur, and the way the league table was set, just a draw for Arsenal meant they would be crowned champions at White Hart Lane, their fiercest rivals' home ground. The match finished 2-2, and Arsenal celebrated winning the league in front of Tottenham's own supporters, which is probably the only time the Spurs fan will ever see aside from North London win a league title at Tottenham Stadium. Arsenal drew the next game 1-1 before beating Fulham and then winning against Leicester on the last day of the season to become the first club to go unbeaten for a whole league season since Preston North End more than a century earlier in 1889, an incredible achievement that gave the squad the title of Invincibles. History had been made. Arsenal kept their unbeaten run going into the next season, getting up to 49 undefeated, but unfortunately, Manchester United stopped them from making it 50 as Van Nistelrooy and Rooney scored to make it 2-0 to Manchester United, ending the invincible run. There was so much bad blood from the game that players had a fight in the tunnel, and Cesc Fabregas allegedly threw a pizza at United manager Alex Ferguson, leaving cheese and tomato on his head and down his suit. That loss started a poor run in the autumn where Arsenal only won 1 match in 6 games, a thrilling 5-4 win over Spurs, and would eventually finish second in the league, not behind United, but behind Jose Mourinho's Chelsea, as a new era of billionaire owners was about to dominate football. Wenger's side did reach the FA Cup final, where Arsenal beat Manchester United on penalties to win their 4th FA Cup under Wenger, but Arsenal knew they needed more money to compete with the top teams in the league, so the following season would be their last at their historic Highbury Stadium, as they planned to move to the large and modern Emirates Stadium. But this move meant sacrifices on the pitch, as Wenger was forced to save money and rely on youth players. But in the 2004-05 season, Arsene Wenger had one more shot of absolute glory, beating Real Madrid, Juventus, and Villarreal in the Champions League to reach the final against Barcelona. Unfortunately, a controversial red card to goalkeeper Jens Lehmann meant Arsenal were forced to play most of the game with 10 men. But they took the lead through Sol Campbell and hung on until the 76th minute before eventually losing 2-1, meaning the Gunners were left heartbroken on the European stage. Over the next years, Wenger's Arsenal struggled to compete with the money of their rivals and often finished 3rd or 4th in the league, although they came close to winning the title in 2008 when their charge was undone by a horrific tackle to Eduardo against Birmingham. Wenger eventually retired in 2018 after a few more FA Cup wins and 22 years at the helm. But Wenger's legacy is not just measured in trophies or even his insane invincible season of 2003-04, but how he changed English football forever, transforming it from men playing Route 1 hoofball between drinking sessions to one of sports science, nutrition, and worldwide scouting. And you could even go so far as to say Wenger's legacy is that he created the modern Premier League as we know it today. But Wenger was not the only football manager to change Premier League football forever, because what Pep Guardiola did was arguably even more transformative for not just the Premier League, but the entire world of football. In 2016, Manchester City got knocked out of the Champions League, the FA Cup, and just about scraped a fourth-place finish in the Premier League. But over the course of the next 8 years, everything changed as they would go on to win 19 major trophies in the most dominant way possible as they broke record after record, changing the way football is played forever. But for all of this to happen, they needed a genius manager capable of leading this team to glory, and that is exactly what Pep Guardiola did. But how did this all happen? How did Pep move to the hardest league in world football and turn it into his playground? Well, for us to understand this, we have to go back to 2008, which is the exact moment Manchester City's trajectory as a football club changed forever. On the 23rd of September 2008, Manchester City Football Club was purchased by Abu Dhabi billionaire Sheikh Mansour, and overnight, hope started to brew in the blue side of Manchester. Fans had watched Chelsea transform from mid-table mediocrity to one of Europe's most deadly forces after a similar multi-million-pound takeover, and the possibility circulated that another superpower had landed in England. Suddenly, overthrowing United as the Premier League's most dominant club became City's sole ambition, and the club's newfound wealth enabled the East Manchester club to secure the signings of elite talents Sergio Aguero, Yaya Toure, David Silva, and Vincent Kompany. So it wasn't long before this exciting young side dramatically won their first Premier League title in 2012 in the final minutes of the season.
Back to Balotelli, it runs for Aguero! They've done it! City win the title! It's Aguero with his 30th goal of the season!
Despite City's exuberant yearly spending, managers would struggle to consistently get the best out of one of the world's most talented teams. Eliakim Mangala, Wilfred Boney, and Raheem Sterling all arrived at the Etihad for large transfer fees, but City only won one of the following 4 Premier League titles as they struggled to build the dynasty that Manchester United had done under Sir Alex. And the club fared no better in the Champions League, embarrassing themselves with frequent group stage exits or getting humiliated by Barcelona and Real Madrid in the early knockout rounds. Come the 15-16 season, and City had struggled, suffering big defeats to Liverpool, Leicester, and Tottenham. And the thought that City could become the Premier League's dominant force began to ease until whispers that a Catalan tactical genius might step into the dugout emerged. You see, Pep Guardiola's tiki-taka football at Barcelona and Bayern Munich was breathtaking, as the young manager won the league title in all but one of his 7 seasons in La Liga and the Bundesliga, not to mention already having 2 Champions League trophies to his name. So, after announcing he'd leave Bayern, the manager had every elite club dreaming of landing his signature, and as City struggled under manager Manuel Pellegrini, it was announced in February 2016 that Guardiola would take over as City boss at the end of the season. That was a sensational move that wasn't supposed to happen. Europe's traditional elite, Man United, AC Milan, and Barcelona, were convinced the superstar manager would favor a move to pre-existing football dynasty, but Guardiola decided to build one instead. And from this moment onwards, football would never be the same. Guardiola arrived in Manchester at a time of Premier League change because overnight it had become box office, as Jose Mourinho had recently been appointed as Man United boss, and the pair had history. During the latter stages of Guardiola's glorious Barcelona days, Mourinho took the helm at El Clasico rivals Real Madrid and snatched a title off Pep, ending a period of dominance that appeared as if it would go on forever. The matches between Guardiola and Mourinho were filled with drama, fallout, and lunging tackles. So supporters around the world waited to see the 2 managerial geniuses lock horns again in Manchester. But Jose wasn't the only nemesis Guardiola would meet again in England, because between 2013 and 2016, Guardiola was making light work of the Bundesliga, leading Bayern Munich to 3 back-to-back titles. But there was one man who somehow knew how to stop Guardiola: Jurgen Klopp. The towering tactician managed Borussia Dortmund while Pep was in Germany and masterminded 4-2, 3-0, and 2-0 victories against the seemingly unbeatable Bayern Munich manager. Klopp's intense gegenpressing football suffocated Guardiola's passing game and proved that the great manager had vulnerabilities and could be beaten by sides who didn't have the same financial power. And to the world's delight, the rivalry would continue in the Premier League, as several months earlier, Klopp had been appointed as Liverpool's boss with a fierce promise to return the Koppites to their former glory. So, if Guardiola was going to lift his first Premier League title, he'd have to overcome his two toughest managerial opponents ever faced. Now, despite Pep's pedigree walking into the Premier League, many pundits doubted whether Guardiola's football could succeed in the face of such aggressive competition on tricky away grounds like Stoke, especially if it was rainy. And for the first year, they would be proven right, as this Man City team was not exactly set up to play beautiful passing football, and he had some work to do. Between the sticks was Joe Hart, an English international goalkeeper who was as prolific as anyone in world football at saving shots. But there was a problem. The legendary City keeper could barely play with the ball at his feet, and Pep wanted a ball player like Manuel Neuer was, so he signed Claudio Bravo. In defense, Vincent Kompany fit into Pep's vision, but that was about it, prompting him to drop $55 million on John Stones to form a center-back partnership to last years. He also signed talents who'd impressed him during his time in the Bundesliga, such as Dortmund's Ilkay Gundogan for $27 million and Schalke's Leroy Sané for $52 million, creating the first steps at building a team that could play Guardiola's expansive style of football. Besides the signings, he walked into a team flowing with talent up front. Aguero, De Bruyne, and Silva, to name a few, meant that Pep was not lacking firepower, they just needed to be taught his system. So, with a team of stars and a total summer transfer spend exceeding 171 million euros, could Guardiola replicate the glory of his Barcelona and Bayern Munich teams in the toughest league in the world? Guardiola's Man City began their journey as they hosted in the Premier League on the starting day with a starting lineup that hardly looked like an outfit that would dominate the division for the following decade. Willy Caballero started between the sticks, and Gaël Clichy, Alexander Kolarov, John Stones, and Bakary Sagna completed a shaky-looking defensive structure. Many believed City's hopes were reliant on their exciting midfield and attack, which featured Fernandinho, Kevin De Bruyne, David Silva, and Sergio Aguero. Despite the imperfect starting lineup, City edged Sunderland 2-1 before following their opening day victory with another 5 back-to-back wins, including a 2-1 triumph against arch-rival Mourinho. Things were looking good for Guardiola until October arrived, and he endured arguably his toughest 2-month managerial spell to date. City traveled to Tottenham, sitting top of the Premier League, feeling dismissive of their White Hart Lane opposition. But Dele Alli inspired the London club to a 2-0 victory, and City rarely threatened throughout the 90 minutes. Guardiola then suffered frustrating 1-1 draws against Everton, Southampton, and Sunderland in 3 of his next 4 Premier League matches before his former side, Barcelona, destroyed City 4-0 in the Champions League. As Messi bagged a hat-trick and reminded Pep of the superstars of his former team, he must have felt his current City side was a million miles away from dominating Europe. Guardiola was quickly learning the relentless nature of football in England, entered 2017 with his team in 5th position. To make matters worse, the boss had lost to his longtime rival Jose Mourinho in the League Cup, and with City out of the domestic cup and languishing outside the Champions League qualification places, pressure was beginning to build. A couple of weeks later, City were beaten 4-0 by Everton, and with Guardiola's first season in England threatening to unravel, he had to react by signing Gabriel Jesus in January, who was an exciting Brazilian youngster who'd been compared to R9 to add flair to City's attack. The 20-year-old striker produced 3 goal involvements in his first 2 starts, but City's form continued to be mixed. While the citizens were routinely seeing off the Premier League's lesser teams, City were held to Premier League draws against Liverpool, Tottenham, Arsenal, and Man United, and were beaten by Chelsea, who were the eventual champions, finishing 15 points ahead of Guardiola's side. City were knocked out of the FA Cup semi-finals by Arsenal and suffered a shock round of 16 Champions League exit against a Monaco side containing Kylian Mbappe, Bernardo Silva, Fabinho, and Benjamin Mendy. And just like that, Guardiola ended his first season in England trophyless. But this was perhaps the most important year of his entire career. Now he knew the holes he had in the squad, he finally adjusted to the Premier League, and with a big summer ahead, everything was about to change. City's mega-rich board was willing to back the manager, giving him millions to spend on talents to make Guardiola's team a serious threat. He started their summer spending by signing Tottenham's electric right-back Kyle Walker for €52 million. He then went to Monaco to raid their young team of stars, picking up Ben Mendy for $60 million and Bernardo Silva for $40 million. But the spending didn't stop there. Guardiola signed Brazilian goalkeeper Ederson for $40 million from Benfica. The shot-stopper played like Neuer with the ball at his feet, and it finally looked like Guardiola's team would finally be able to build up in possession in the way the City boss dreamed of. Pep ended the summer signings with one final centre-back in Aymeric Laporte from Athletic Club for a jaw-dropping €65 million, adding up to a total of $250 million spent for the summer. And now with almost $500 million spent in 2 seasons, this was do or die for Pep. The owners, the media, and the fans were going to settle for nothing short of success, but little did they know the extent to which success was going to be coming their way. As City's 17-18 season got underway, Guardiola's team were noticeably different. During an opening day Premier League victory over Brighton, the Citizens started in a 5-3-2 formation, with Walker and Danilo providing width from the wing-back positions. The speed and shape they gave to City contrasted with their fullbacks the previous season, who were solid but fairly conservative. Guardiola's tactical switch enabled City to push 6 players forward during attacks, a move that proved to be deadly. City were second in the table by matchday 4 when they battered Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool 5-0, emphatically demonstrating that City's summer signings would help them to beat the big boys this time around. And the real statement victory came a couple of weeks later as City edged Premier League champions Chelsea 2-0. The Citizens would go on an incredible, record-breaking run of 18 straight wins, including thrashing Crystal Palace 6-0, Watford 5-0, Stoke 7-2, and Tottenham 4-1, as well as seeing off Arsenal 3-1 and Man United 2-0 as, yet again, Pep was getting the better of Jose. By the turn of the new year, City had already beaten every Big Six club and had scored 63 league goals in just 20 matches. But if there was a manager who could bring Guardiola back down to earth, it was Jurgen Klopp, and City traveled to Anfield brimming with confidence, but left with scars that would haunt them throughout the remainder of Guardiola's time in England. Klopp's Liverpool side were as relentless, energetic, and clinical as the Dortmund side that punctured Pep's Bayern so frequently, as they gegenpressed their way to a 4-3 victory in front of a rampant Anfield crowd. And while the Premier League fixture did not impact the title race, it did create a psychological wound that damaged Guardiola as the two teams met again in the quarterfinals of the Champions League. City were favorites to win the tournament, and Pep was desperate to deliver the trophy that had evaded him. If Anfield was electric during their Premier League contest a few months earlier, it was volcanic when the sides met in the Champions League. Supporters created a hostile environment before the City players had even stepped off the bus, as chants, flares, and even bottles were directed at the team's bus. City stepped onto the storied Anfield pitch, evidently shaken, as they were smashed 3-0 by Klopp's team, and then 2-1 in the second leg, meaning the European dream was cut short. This would be a common theme through Pep's time in England, as it was the only trophy missing in the Manchester City cabinet, so it would mean oh so much to them. But domestically, I can't say anyone in blue was complaining. They won 12 of their final 15 Premier League games as they lifted the title, having accumulated an unprecedented 100 points, scored a record-breaking 106 goals, and finished with a goal difference of plus 79, which was the greatest of any team in the division's history. Having won the League Cup with a 3-0 victory over Arsenal a few months earlier, the double-winning season had been an undisputed success, and concerns that Guardiola's football would not translate to the English game were vanquished. But Pep was hungry for more. He couldn't rest until City had created an empire that made the club the most successful English side of the modern era. And with Liverpool showing signs of strengthening, he knew his team would have to be even better to get their hands on the Premier League or Champions League in 18-19. During 17-18, Guardiola redefined the way football was being played in England, as his City team passed out from the back, operated in tight spaces, and finished teams off inside the box. Many managers across the Premier League and further down the football pyramid attempted to emulate this style. But as rival managers tried to recreate Guardiola's tactics, the Catalan manager continued to evolve and find new ways of playing. During the summer of 2018, he signed Leicester City's Riyad Mahrez for €67.8 million Blues, and while it may have been tempting to stick with the power and pace of wingers Raheem Sterling and Leroy Sané, the Algerian addition offered something different. He was slow and more controlled, silky and elegant on the ball. He liked the ball to come to feet rather than running it behind. The signing coincided with the integration of Phil Foden, a youth player Guardiola described as the most talented I have ever seen. The duo proved to be pivotal as City were forced to find new ways to break down teams sitting deep in a low block. The Citizens started the season in spectacular fashion, winning 13 and drawing 2 of their opening 15 fixtures. Their early form was enough to have one hand on the trophy in most other Premier League seasons, yet Guardiola's side still only had a 2-point lead over Liverpool. City once again failed to beat Klopp and Liverpool at Anfield as the title-challenging duo were held to a 0-0 draw in October, and a feeling intensified that if City were to beat their almost faultless Merseyside opposition to the title, they'd have to beat them in a head-to-head match at the Etihad. The pressure grew on City in the weeks heading up to the clash, being dubbed as the Premier League final, especially after shock defeats to Chelsea, Palace and Leicester gave Liverpool a 7-point lead before the pair met in early January 2019. In what was arguably the highest quality game in Premier League history, City edged a 2-1 victory over Liverpool by the tiniest of margins. A famous goal line clearance by John Stones prevented the Coppites from coming away with a point, and had the ball traveled a single spin further, Liverpool would be heading back to Anfield with the title nearly won. But City's victory blew the race wide open, and they were sure not to waste their lifeline. Guardiola's men won all but one of their final 17 Premier League matches to somehow finish the season on 98 points and beat one of the greatest teams in top-flight English history to the title by a single point. However, the battle for English and European supremacy between Guardiola and Klopp wasn't over. City were knocked out of the Champions League quarter-finals by Tottenham in one of the most dramatic games the tournament had ever seen, while Klopp lifted Liverpool's 6th European Cup, meaning Pep had now gone back-to-back in England but still could not break down the European door. Also, this season saw Jose Mourinho get the sack at Manchester United, meaning that old rivalry was very much put to bed as it was all about Klopp now. And City's rivalry with Liverpool continued to heat up the following season because, despite the summer signings of Joao Cancelo and Rodri, City started the season below their usual standards, suffering shock defeats to Norwich and Wolves. When Guardiola traveled to his nightmare battleground of Anfield 12 games into the season, City were already 8 points behind Liverpool. After a 3-1 defeat in which the reigning Premier League champions barely laid a glove on Liverpool, Klopp's team were already 11 points clear and the title became out of reach. It was clear that despite City's superiority over the previous 2 seasons, the Citizens were no longer England or Europe's best, and Guardiola would have to go back to the drawing board to regain dominance. The COVID-19 disturbed 1920 season ended with City as winners of the League Cup thanks to a 2-1 victory over Aston Villa, but ultimately unsatisfied. They finished 18 points behind Liverpool in the Premier League, were knocked out by Lyon in the quarter-finals of the Champions League, and lost in the semi-finals of the FA Cup against Arsenal. For a team and manager that were so accustomed to winning, the season was simply not good enough. So Guardiola did what he knew best and reinvented his team to align with his ever-evolving tactics. He signed defenders Ruben Dias from Benfica for €71 million and Nathan Ake from Bournemouth for €45 million to add assurance to a backline that had been exposed too frequently in the previous season. However, City's form continued to stutter. They dropped points against Leicester, Leeds, West Ham, Liverpool, and Tottenham during the opening 10 games of the 2021 season, and many began to question whether Guardiola's tactics had run their course in the Premier League. But the shaky early season wasn't a sign of the beginning of the end for Guardiola at City, but rather the beginning of a new chapter and a new way of playing. Joao Cancelo and Zinchenko were deployed as inverted fullbacks, allowing City to play with an extra man pulling the strings in midfield or protecting the central defenders out of possession. Rodri became imperious from defensive midfield and controlled matches with technique and simplicity in a way the Premier League had never seen before. Meanwhile, Ruben Dias' leadership and ball-playing ability elevated John Stones' game up to a different level as City finally embodied Guardiola's vision. It was a tactical shift partly driven by a desire to regain the Premier League title, but largely to see City over the line in crucial Champions League matches where they'd conceded too many goals to Monaco, Liverpool, Tottenham, and Lyon in the previous seasons. Guardiola's plan was genius. City won 19 of 21 Premier League fixtures between December and May to lift the the title without a clear competitor. They strolled past Arsenal, Man United, and Tottenham to win the League Cup and beat Dortmund and PSG on their way to a first Champions League final where they'd meet Chelsea. It was the moment the entire Sheikh Mansour project had been leading up to, but the 2021 Champions League final did not go as expected. City were overwhelming favorites going into the final showdown with Chelsea, but they'd been defeated by Tuchel's resurgent side twice in the final weeks of the season. Lingering doubts emerged as City's lack of dominance in the two matches caused Guardiola to overthink, and he started the game without his ever-present defensive midfielder Rodri. The Spaniards' absence prevented the citizens from controlling the game, and they crumbled to a shock 1-0 defeat. Almost unthinkably, the Champions League dream was forced to wait another season. With City's new system looking untouchable in the Premier League, domestic glory wouldn't be good enough to satisfy Sheikh Mansour, Guardiola, or the supporters the following season. The entire club was on its knees begging for a Champions League triumph. Still, they picked up yet another Premier League, returning themselves to the top of English football, finishing well clear of second-place Manchester United, making it 3 titles in 5 years in England for the citizens. As we head into the 21-22 season, people were just expecting City to win yet another title, and they routinely saw off Premier League opposition each weekend, so attention diverted to the Champions League. PSG, RB Leipzig, and Club Brugge were ruthlessly dispatched in the group stages before City put Sporting CP to the sword in the round of 16. But a tougher ask would await them in the quarterfinals as they faced Diego Simeone's Atletico Madrid. The resolute, defensively minded Spanish club shocked Europe when they knocked prime Liverpool out of the Champions League 2 years earlier, and they'd won La Liga the year before. Simeone's team parked the bus and rattled Guardiola's side in a style so emphatic it would make Mourinho blush, but De Bruyne found a way through as City edged a 1-0 aggregate win. With Liverpool resurgent in the Premier League and pushing in the FA Cup and Champions League, the end of the season seemed to be defined by another Klopp versus Guardiola battle. In fact, the football world dreamed of Champions League and FA Cup finals featuring the two Titan managers, but City would have to overcome a tough task against Real Madrid in a European semi-final first. City entered the semi-final as clear favorites and were confident it might finally be their year to lift the European Cup, and initially it seemed like that would be the case, as goals from De Bruyne and Jesus gave City an early 2-0 advantage in the first leg. But City lost their crucial 2-goal advantage and the game finished 4-3, meaning City would travel to the imposing Bernabeu Stadium with the tie far from complete. Once again, City took the lead, this time through an early Mahrez strike, but unlike the first leg, Guardiola's side controlled the game through Rodri, Cancelo, and Diaz's brilliance and looked set to meet Liverpool in the final of the Champions League. With 90 minutes on the clock, the tie appeared to be dead and buried, but then something crazy happened. Rodrigo scored a right-footed effort that should have been no more than a stoppage-time consolation goal, but panic swept across Guardiola's men. The Brazilian winger added a second with his head moments later, completing an unimaginable comeback and sending the game into extra time. And with City deflated, the tie was only going in one direction. Benzema scored a penalty in extra time to send City crashing out of the Champions League, questioning how and why they'd let almost guaranteed success slip through their fingertips once again. Luckily, City beat Liverpool to the Premier League title by a single point once again after completing a dramatic final day comeback against Aston Villa, but lost to their Northwest opposition in the semi-finals of the FA Cup. Despite another year of Premier League success, the agony, hunger, and desperation for Champions League glory wasn't going away. As the mad genius had done so many times before, Guardiola returned to the lab, desperately trying to find the answers for Champions League success. While he'd strengthened City's defense and given his team more control, they hadn't had an elite out-and-out striker since the days of prime Sergio Aguero. So Pep decided to sign towering Norwegian goal machine Erling Haaland. The 6'5" striker was undoubtedly the world's most exciting young forward, having scored 62 Bundesliga goals in 67 appearances for Dortmund. But despite his impressive resume, many questioned whether the striker would suit Guardiola's system. During his blistering form at Dortmund, the striker would complete 60-yard sprints, run in behind defenses, and terrify goalkeepers with his deadly one-on-one finishing. With Premier League and European opposition typically sitting deep against Guardiola's side, it was unclear whether his electric Wenger-centric style would fit City's build-up. But nobody was doubting the Norwegian by game week 13, as Haaland had already notched 17 times in the Premier League, along with 5 goals in his first 3 Champions League matches. Like so many years before, City was astonishing. Yet, in their recently adopted 3-4-2-1 formation, something was different. John Stones stepped out from defense and dictated games like a Spanish midfielder. Bernardo Silva, Phil Foden, Jack Grealish, Ilkay Gundogan, and Rodri worked tirelessly for the team in the middle of the pitch, and Haaland ruthlessly finished teams off from inside the box. On nervy Champions League nights when City had so often looked flustered before, they tore apart Bayern Munich and Real Madrid with 4-1 and 5-1 thrashings in the quarter and semi-finals before meeting Inter Milan in the final. City had already secured the FA Cup, having beaten local rivals United in the final and broken North London hearts after completing a late comeback to snatch their 3rd back-to-back title. They now reached a point where a Champions League triumph would complete the treble and fulfill a decade-long ambition of building a dynasty that matches the legacy of Sir Alex Ferguson's United, the only previous English club to do this. And this time, the final went as expected. Guardiola had learned from his mistakes of previous years and selected a familiar lineup. City edged past Inter Milan 1-0 to win their first Champions League trophy and complete an iconic treble thanks to a glorious strike from Rodri.
Bernardo Silva, tight angle, pulls it back, coming onto it now to shoot, score! Rodri! Manchester City lead in the Champions League final!
It seemed as if the battle had finally been won. The Catalans' old rival Mourinho was nowhere to be seen. Klopp was on the decline, and United were out of the picture. In fact, there was a feeling City's 5 Premier League titles in 7 years under Guardiola could quickly turn into 8 in 10, putting United's legacy as England's most successful club of the modern era under serious doubt. And the following season, City broke history once again, becoming the first club to ever win 4 back-to-back Premier League titles and prompting complaints from rival supporters and media pundits that Guardiola had turned the English top flight into an uncompetitive, embarrassing farmers' league. It was at this moment that Guardiola knew he had done the impossible. When he arrived in England, neutrals doubted whether the Catalan style could outsmart even the division's less established sides like Stoke City. But after 9 years at the helm, he'd made the same critics question the competitiveness of the league they swore he'd be unable to conquer. And now, after a disappointing 24-25 season, Guardiola's team looks ready to redefine the beautiful game once again and further establish their legacy against the ever-diminishing shadows of rivals, Man United. But whilst Man United fell apart during Pep's era at Man City, Liverpool Football Club saw an insane rise to dominance under the great Jurgen Klopp. And believe me, this is one heck of a story. Jurgen Klopp entered a Liverpool side who had just sold all their best players, hadn't won a Champions League in a decade, and never lifted a Premier League title in their history. But in just a couple of years, he somehow turned them into the most terrifying team in all of Europe, winning literally every trophy there was to win. But how on earth did he do it? How did a crazy German transform a trophyless Liverpool into the greatest team in Europe, and doing it with half the transfer budget of his competitors? This is the insane story of how Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool quite literally broke football. Now, before we get to his time in Liverpool, we have to understand how he got there, because he was no household name as a football player. The truth is, he was bang average at best, as he spent basically all of his playing career at German lower league club Mainz, who were better known for their festivals than their football. And after an underwhelming playing career was finished, he was given the job as their manager, where he surprised everyone, as in just his first season in charge, he won promotion to the Bundesliga for the first time in the club's history. But not only that, because then, with the smallest budget in the entire Bundesliga, he managed to get Mainz into the UEFA Cup, causing the entirety of Germany to start looking at Jurgen and wonder what magic he possessed as a coach. It wasn't long before Borussia Dortmund hired him as their next manager, and there, he really shocked the world. He developed his gegenpressing style of football, which blew opponents away. This style was new to football. It was an extremely high pressing and high energy system, which other clubs could just not handle. During his time in Dortmund, he won the Bundesliga twice, the DFB Pokal, and that also meant he couldn't take just any job in football. There needed to be his heart in it. So, when Liverpool came knocking on the door, a sleeping giant with one of the strongest fan bases in all of Europe, this decision was a no-brainer. But what exactly was the state of Liverpool at this point in time? Well, they'd parted ways with manager Brendan Rodgers, who, as far as Liverpool managers go, had done reasonably well as he came oh so close to the Premier League title, if not for that one fatal slip from Steven Gerrard in 2014. After that season, all their star players had left the club, with Suarez going to Barcelona, Sterling to Man City, and even Steven Gerrard had left to the MLS at the end of 2015. And with all that happening, Liverpool slipped from title challengers to a measly 6th place finish by the time Brendan Rodgers left. But beside the recent issues, Liverpool had been struggling for decades as they hadn't been able to replicate their success of the 1980s, lifting only 1 Champions League and 0 Premier Leagues in 3 decades. The Liverpool fans were hurting because, in this time, their rivals Man United lifted the Premier League title 13 times and the Champions League twice as they overthrew Liverpool to become the most successful club in England. So, now the stage was set. Jurgen Klopp arrived in Liverpool on the 8th of October 2015 as the entire fan base prayed he could replicate the magic he conjured up over in Dortmund. And let me tell you, from now, I don't think a single Liverpool fan could have predicted just how well it was going to go. Now, when Klopp arrived in Liverpool, this club was an absolute mess as they just couldn't score goals since the loss of Suarez and Sterling, and for some reason, Liverpool's owners thought that the answer to Liverpool's goal shortage was to sign Christian Benteke and Danny Ings. This was one of the most average Liverpool teams, with the only notable players being Jordan Henderson, James Milner, Bobby Firmino, and the diamond of the team, Felipe Coutinho. But despite this, expectations at Anfield were high, with the hope that every new manager is the one who will bring back the glory days of the 80s, but Klopp addressed these high expectations early on by telling the press, "Does anyone in this room think that I can do wonders? I'm a normal guy from the Black Forest," which was a strong contrast to what the press were used to with the likes of Mourinho. Jurgen Klopp's first Liverpool game came on October 17th away to Tottenham Hotspur, as the match ended in a goalless draw, and from the team he put out, there was no wondering why. In goal stood Simon Mignolet. The back four consisted of Nathaniel Klein, Martin Skrtel, Mamadou Sakho, and Alberto Moreno. The midfield trio saw Lucas Leiva, Emre Can, and James Milner acting as the engine room, and the forward line saw Adam Lallana, Felipe Coutinho, and Divock Origi take center stage. It was going to be a long road ahead, as that season Liverpool struggled in the league and eventually finished 8th as defensive issues hampered the club's hopes, with Liverpool conceding 50 league goals, and Liverpool only signed Marco Grujic this year, meaning the squad saw no meaningful changes. But despite the leaky defense, he did start to build the foundations of his heavy metal football and introduced England to gegenpressing, where players press hard to win the ball back immediately after losing possession, as well as creating a never-say-die mentality that saw Liverpool pull off comeback wins and score last-minute winners like Adam Lallana's late goal in a 5-4 win over Norwich that saw Klopp literally break his glasses during the celebrations. Klopp also managed to reach the League Cup final, where they lost on penalties to Manchester City in one of his epic matches against Pep Guardiola. And then, looking to the Europa League, Liverpool faced Klopp's former club Borussia Dortmund in the quarterfinals, and in a dramatic second leg, Liverpool came back from 3-1 down to win 4-3 in the last minute, and then beat Villarreal in the semis to make it to the final. But unfortunately, Klopp couldn't get his hands on his first Liverpool trophy, as the team lost 3-1 to Sevilla in the final, making it 2 final defeats in his very first season. This was also adding fuel to rival fans' criticism, as he had also lost the Champions League final when he was with Dortmund, prompting fans to label him as a bottler who couldn't get over the line. But after this season, Klopp knew who was to stay and who was to go, and in that summer, Liverpool binned off 15 players, including Benteke, Joe Allen, Mario Balotelli, and Martin Skrtel, meaning the Brendan Rodgers era was truly over. This also meant Klopp could really start putting his stamp on the squad, and he did exactly that by splashing out on Southampton forward Sadio Mane, as well as adding Joel Matip, Loris Karius, and Jorginho Wijnaldum to the team. Now, due to their 8th place finish, Liverpool had no European football going into 2016-17, and this actually proved to be a blessing, as it meant more time on the training ground, more focus on the style, and growth was definitely coming. Despite losing to Burnley in the second week of the season, Liverpool started 2016-17 on fire, winning 8 of their opening 11 games to go top of the table at the start of November thanks to the attacking form of Sadio Mane and Roberto Firmino, as Liverpool scored 4 or more goals in 5 of those opening 11 games, which actually kept a title challenge through Christmas. But this is when Sadio Mane had to go to the Africa Cup of Nations, and without him, Liverpool slumped to a 5-game winless streak, putting title hopes to bed very quickly. Come the end of the season, they had a strong push and secured Champions League football with a 3-0 win over Middlesbrough on the final day, but still, their defensive issues caused them problems all year. And to make matters worse, come the summer, Liverpool were about to be hit with some bombshell news as their star player Felipe Coutinho was asked to leave the club, with Barcelona offering a huge fee for the Brazilian. Coutinho had signed a 5-year deal just 6 months prior, but with the strong interest, his head had turned, meaning Liverpool spent the whole summer fighting off higher offer after higher offer, managing to keep Felipe at the club for now. But during that same summer, there was one bit of business that Liverpool did which can be seen as the watershed moment in the club's recent history. A signing who quite literally changed the trajectory of the entire club, and that was Mohamed Salah. Whilst now we look back and think about this signing as obvious, it really wasn't at the time. You see, Salah had already played in England for Chelsea a couple years prior, but struggled to perform. He had then been loaned out to Fiorentina, then to Roma in Italy, and eventually joined on a full transfer where he finally began to shine, scoring 19 goals as Roma finished second in the Serie A. But still, fans were questioning whether he could perform in the Premier League, especially as Liverpool spent more than £40 million on him, which at the time was a club record sum. So now Klopp had completed his attacking unit, a front three consisting of Salah, Firmino, and Mane, with Coutinho playing in behind them, and they started the season awfully. They were battered 5-0 by Manchester City, 4-1 to Spurs, and won only 3 of their opening 9 games. But then, something just clicked as Liverpool smashed through the league with a 14-game unbeaten run that pulled them up to 3rd, with Salah scoring 13 goals in that run alone, as he already established himself as one of the deadliest wingers in the league. The same Klopp story continued, goals galore on both ends, as the defense just wasn't good enough, until finally the January transfer window rolled around and Liverpool completed the signing of Virgil van Dijk from Southampton for a jaw-dropping £70 million, smashing the club record Liverpool had spent on Salah in the summer. But this deal was only made possible because they knew what was about to happen the following week. Felipe Coutinho kept pushing for that move and finally got his way as Barcelona dropped over £100 million on their star man. This felt like a devastating blow at the time, but looking back, it was the turning point of the club as the team was finally starting to take shape in the way Klopp was envisioning. Van Dijk and Dejan Lovren as the center-back pairing, local boy Trent Alexander-Arnold, and summer signing from Hull City, Andy Robertson as the fullbacks, James Milner, Jordan Henderson, and Wijnaldum in midfield, and Salah, Firmino, and Mane up front. This team was doing well in the league too, even beating Pep Guardiola's basically invincible Man City team 4-3. And Salah, well, he was on absolute fire, scoring 4 goals in 1 game against Watford and finishing the season with 44 goals in all competitions, even breaking the Premier League goal-scoring record in his first year in England, landing him the PFA Player of the Season award too. But while Liverpool only finished 4th in the league, this season was all about the Champions League, as Liverpool smashed Porto in the round of 16, then even beat Man City 5-1 on aggregate in the quarterfinals. The semi-final looked to be just as comfortable as Liverpool went 5-2 against Roma at Anfield, but come the second leg, had to survive a late scare as Roma won that tie 4-2, meaning Liverpool just about got through on aggregate with a 7-6 scoreline. And now the stage was set. The Champions League final in Kiev, where Liverpool fans dreamt of lifting it for the 6th time in their history and the first time in almost 15 years. They faced off against Real Madrid, who had won it the previous 2 seasons, and this was about to get controversial. In the first half, Sergio Ramos locked his body around Salah's arm, causing Liverpool's star player to dislocate his shoulder and have to leave the pitch injured, meaning Liverpool were about to play the majority of the final without their star man. Ramos then elbowed Liverpool goalkeeper Loris Karius in the head, causing him to suffer a concussion, which eventually led him to make the biggest mistake of his entire career as he threw the ball straight at Karim Benzema to gift a free goal. Mane quickly equalized, putting that mistake to rest, but it wasn't long before Karius mishandled a long-range shot from Gareth Bale and then let in a stunner of a bicycle kick, also from Bale, meaning this game ended 3-1 in favor of Real Madrid, and Jurgen Klopp had lost yet another final. But still, the signs of growth were there, and this Liverpool team were just a few puzzle pieces away from absolutely exploding. As the summer rolled around, Jurgen Klopp made his final tweaks to the squad to complete the Liverpool super team. He knew that Karius wasn't the goalkeeper for the team, so he signed Alisson for £67 million. He also added Fabinho, Naby Keita, and Xherdan Shaqiri to the squad, and finally, the team was complete. This was now a team where every position had a top-class player, and it was time to challenge Pep Guardiola's crown in the Premier League and also get vengeance for the European heartbreak that just occurred. Liverpool won their first 6 games of the 18-19 season, their best start in their history, and that fired them to the top of the league. But their next 2 games were against title rivals Chelsea and Manchester City. They drew 1-1 away in West London and were 0-0 against City at Anfield when Van Dijk fouled Leroy Sané in the 86th minute, giving City a penalty. But Riyad Mahrez blew his chance by smashing the penalty over the bar, meaning the game also ended in a goalless draw. Liverpool won the next 2 games before a tough Merseyside derby against Everton, who locked the door to keep the game goalless until the 96th minute, when Divock Origi pounced on a rebound to win the game, causing Klopp to run onto the pitch to celebrate like a madman. Liverpool then went on a 9-game run that saw them go to the top of the league at Christmas, and usually the team that's top at Christmas wins the league, but Liverpool had tough fixtures ahead. They ended the festive period with games against Arsenal and Man City, but Bobby Firmino would shine in the first of those as Liverpool smashed Arsenal 5-1 before a huge game against City, who scored the first through Sergio Aguero before Firmino equalized, but in the 72nd minute, Leroy Sané would score to inflict Liverpool's first loss of the season. Now, at this point, Liverpool were still top, but a series of draws, including ones against Manchester United and Everton, allowed City to creep ahead of Liverpool by a single point with 9 games to go. Liverpool beat Burnley and Fulham, then got a last-minute winner against Spurs to make it 3 from 3, but City won all their games too. Liverpool then beat Southampton and got a huge win over Chelsea, but still, City didn't slip up. Liverpool beat Cardiff, smashed 5 past Huddersfield, and beat Newcastle 3-2, but yet again, City were ahead, and even though Liverpool won 2-0 on the final day to finish the season with an insane 97 points, Manchester City finished on 98, meaning somehow, despite achieving what would have been the second greatest points tally in Premier League history, they fell short, losing a single game all season. This was devastating. Klopp just couldn't get over the line with this Liverpool team despite turning them into one of the greatest sides of all time, and this would not be the last time City broke Liverpool hearts like this. On individual levels, Salah and Mane were the standout performers up front, as they were both named top goal scorers in the Premier League with 22 goals each. But as much as the Premier League proved total heartbreak, the Champions League was an entirely different story. Now, Liverpool just about scraped through their group with PSG finishing first and Liverpool second on 9 points, level with third-place Napoli. But thanks to a better head-to-head, they landed a spot in the round of 16. They defeated Bayern Munich 3-1 on aggregate and then smashed Porto 6-1 in the next round, meaning they landed themselves a place in the semi-finals against Barcelona. And this is where one of the worst and the greatest nights in Liverpool history occurred. They were battered 3-0 in the first leg, with former Liverpool man Luis Suarez scoring the first and Messi killing off Liverpool's Champions League dreams with 2 late goals, meaning they headed to Anfield 3 goals down against one of the best teams in the world with the best player in the world. For any club in Europe, this would be impossible, but Liverpool had overcome such odds before against AC Milan in Istanbul back in 2005, so this was part of the club's DNA, and they never stopped believing, with Klopp saying, "Just try or fail in the most beautiful way." An early goal from Divock Origi gave them a glimmer of hope. Then, early in the second half, Jorginho Wijnaldum produced 3 minutes of genius, scoring a low drive and then a header to bring Liverpool level in the tie. And when Trent Alexander-Arnold tried a quick corner in the 79th minute, Origi was alert again to score his second of the match and send Liverpool into the final in one of the greatest Champions League comebacks of all time. And Liverpool probably couldn't believe their luck, as instead of facing Real Madrid, AC Milan, or Manchester City, they faced Tottenham Hotspur. Salah scored a penalty in the second minute to put Liverpool in the driver's seat, and then Liverpool's defense completely shut out Spurs' attack before Origi finished the job late on to give Jurgen Klopp his first trophy with Liverpool and finally put the bottling comments to bed. But now, as much as Liverpool were European champions, the fans craved something even more than that. They still hadn't won a league since 1990, and they were desperate, which is exactly why next season was even more special than this one. Interestingly enough, for the first time in Klopp's time at Anfield, they didn't really do much in the transfer window. No major incomings or outgoings, which meant Liverpool came back exactly as they left off. They did start the season with a Community Shield loss on penalties to City, but then lifted the UEFA Super Cup on penalties to Chelsea, which made up for the first loss. And as the Premier League campaign rolled out, Liverpool were not going to leave anything to chance as they started with a bang, winning their first 8 Premier League games and seeing off the likes of Arsenal and Chelsea in the process. Andy Robertson made a heroic last-ditch tackle to save the day against Sheffield United, and James Milner getting a last-minute penalty kick winner over Leicester to keep the run going until Liverpool traveled to Old Trafford to face Manchester United, who took the lead through Marcus Rashford before Adam Lallana came off the bench to score late on and secure a point. Liverpool were now 6 points clear of City, but again had to come from behind against Tottenham. They then found themselves losing to Aston Villa with 3 minutes of normal time remaining before Andy Robertson headed in at the back post, and in the 5th minute of injury time, Sadio Mane got the winner, showing how Klopp's side were truly mentality monsters, with Van Dijk simply saying, "It's what we do." Next up came Manchester City, where Liverpool widened the gap to 9 points, and they just kept winning. In December, they headed off to the Club World Cup, where they beat Flamengo in extra time to secure another trophy, but still they were chasing down that Premier League title. And as the year drew to a close, Liverpool put Leicester firmly in their place with a 4-0 win, courtesy of a brace from Firmino and goals from Milner and Alexander-Arnold. So by January, when Van Dijk and Salah scored to beat Manchester United 2-0, fans were finally singing, "We're going to win the league." And despite all those years when Liverpool were top at Christmas, only to throw the title away in the second half of the season, this year, fans knew it would finally be different, as nothing could derail Liverpool, who went on an 18-match winning streak. And even though they were finally beaten with a shock 3-0 defeat by Watford in February, they were already an insane 25 points ahead of City, which is so far ahead that the title was inevitable, bar some sort of crazy natural disaster or pandemic or, well, Football was shut down overnight, with the COVID pandemic putting the country into a complete state of panic. Liverpool needed just 2 more wins to be crowned champions, but this had to be delayed. Liverpool fans were nervously waiting for announcements from the government or football authorities. But thankfully, the rest of the season was to be played out in the summer, and on June 21st, they played their 30th match of the season against Everton, but this time behind closed doors. The game finished 0-0, but Liverpool were back in action. They absolutely dominated Crystal Palace in their next game, with goals from Trent, Salah, Fabinho, and Mane, giving Liverpool the 4-0 win. And when Man City lost their game to Chelsea 24 hours later, Liverpool were crowned champions of England for the 19th time, setting record after record, including the most consecutive home wins and finishing with 99 points, which was the second highest points total in the top flight history, as Klopp's side went officially down as one of the greatest teams of all time. Klopp had finally beaten Pep, but as much as this Premier League was celebrated, this Liverpool team were just so hungry for more. But could they really keep up this intensity for yet another season? In the summer of 2020, Liverpool made moves in the transfer market, signing forward Diogo Jota and midfielder Thiago. But unfortunately, these weren't enough to re-energize Liverpool, who actually won their first 3 games before a surprise battering 7-2 by Aston Villa, followed by a nightmare injury to key defender Virgil van Dijk against Everton, which would be the start of a defensive injury crisis for Liverpool, who also lost Joe Gomez and Joel Matip. To make matters worse, they'd sold Dejan Lovren in the summer, meaning Liverpool were really bare bones at the back. And even though they remained unbeaten until the end of the year and were actually top of the Premier League again at Christmas, the lack of support meant Anfield was no longer a fortress, and Liverpool lost a shocking 6 home games in a row, dropping as low as 7th before recovering at the end of the season to finish 3rd, 30 points short of the previous season's epic total. In 2021, Liverpool continued their rebuild, bringing in Luis Diaz and adding defensive strength in Ibrahima Konate, and with fans back in the stadiums, Liverpool started the 21-22 season strongly, flying top of the league once again after 6 games, and it took until the 11th game to lose their first. But of course, they recovered quickly, winning 6 on the bounce, putting them in a strong position in the league. Now, by this point in Klopp's tenure, he still hadn't won any of the domestic cups. He was obviously both a Champions League and Premier League winner, but now it was time to dominate everything. And as this season progressed, more and more did fans think the impossible was going to be possible. Come January, they found themselves in the League Cup final against Chelsea, and after finishing 0-0, this game went to penalties, going all the way to the 11th kick, where Chelsea's goalkeeper had to step up and missed, meaning Liverpool were crowned League Cup champions, making that one of 4 possible trophies this year. Back in the league, Liverpool pushed City all the way, going on a 10-game winning run before their trip to the Etihad. But unfortunately, the game ended 2-2, and at such a late stage in the season, this was really a title decider. By this point, Liverpool were still in all competitions. They were marching into the Champions League final. They entered the final Premier League day 1 point off City, and they even found themselves in the FA Cup final, meaning they were quite literally on the cusp of immortality as the quadruple was up for grabs. Unfortunately, the month of May did not go their way. City just wouldn't slip up, as Liverpool yet again finished 1 point off City with a 92-point tally. In the FA Cup final, Liverpool faced Chelsea and once again drew 0-0 before winning 6-5 on penalties to give Jurgen Klopp the domestic cup title. But in their very last game of the season, Klopp's men marched out to yet another Champions League final against Real Madrid, and history unfortunately repeated itself. They just couldn't get past this side, losing 1-0 at the hands of a Vinicius Jr. goal. Meaning, as much as 2 domestic cups is great, they were literally 2 games away from immortality that year. Now, this season clearly took a toll on the whole squad, as it looked like they finally ran out of gas. Come 2022-23, they did pick up a Community Shield, but that's about all there was to celebrate, as they ended up finishing the season in 5th place, missing out on the Champions League spots as Klopp entered the final season of his Liverpool career with one last chance to bring glory to the city he loved so much. Come 2023-24, this Liverpool side did bounce back, and once again, Liverpool would start strongly, finding themselves top of the league by Christmas amid a 15-game unbeaten run, as well as smashing West Ham in the League Cup quarterfinals and scraping past Fulham in the semis to set up yet another Chelsea-Liverpool final, which was also 0-0 after 90 minutes and looked destined for penalties before Van Dijk scored in the 118th minute to win Klopp his 2nd League Cup of his career. In the Europa League, Klopp couldn't replicate the same success, as they lost 3-1 on aggregate to Atalanta in the quarterfinals, and come the end of the league season, Liverpool's form fell off as they fell down to 3rd place behind both Arsenal and, of course, Pep's Man City. And this proved to be the end of Klopp's time in charge of the team, as he simply said he was tired and couldn't keep pushing at the same level. He won every single trophy he could win at the club. He turned Liverpool into one of the most feared teams in Europe, and he even left the squad in the best possible shape to be inherited, as the very next season, Arne Slot lifted the Premier League title without making a single signing, meaning furthermore, Jurgen Klopp will forever go down as a legend of Liverpool Football Club. But now, last and certainly not least, we have the only side on this list who actually did not win a Premier League title, but Chelsea under Thomas Tuchel managed to do something that is arguably even greater, because somehow he managed to take them to European glory. In January 2021, Frank Lampard was sacked as the Chelsea manager, as they had no style of play, sat 9th in the Premier League, and had just wasted £220 million on flops like Havertz, Werner, and Ziyech. But just 5 months later, this team of flops would lift the Champions League trophy, led by a genius manager who literally outplayed everyone. But how on earth was this possible? This is the story of how Thomas Tuchel took a team of underperforming flops and literally made them the best team in Europe. Now, to understand how this all happened, we have to roll the clock back to 2019 when Maurizio Sarri was in charge of the club, and in February of that year, FIFA placed Chelsea under a 2-window transfer ban after 150 rule breaches involving academy players over several seasons, and most worryingly for the Premier League giants, their team was already miles behind Liverpool and Man City, who were dominating England with 97 and 98-point finishes. Eden Hazard, the club's best player for much of the past decade, departed for Real Madrid, and with nobody to replace their talisman, a top 4 finish seemed desperately unlikely the following season. So, with the disaster that was going on at the club, Maurizio Sarri jumped ship to join Juventus, and Chelsea, under a transfer ban and unable to attract the game's greatest minds, were scrambling around to find a new gaffer. But at this same time, Lampard, who was Chelsea's goal-scoring hero of the 2000s and 2010s, was showing promise in the championship with Derby County, and additionally, he already had pre-existing relationships with some of the club's most exciting young stars, such as Mason Mount and Fikayo Tomori, so Chelsea took a punt and hired the inexperienced manager. And after all, if Chelsea were to survive their crippling transfer ban, they'd be forced to utilize their Cobham Youth Academy, which had been overlooked for far too long. Top-tier talents, including Declan Rice, Ola Aina, Nathan Ake, and Jamal Musiala, had slipped through Chelsea's youth ranks in recent times, and the London club couldn't afford to continue losing or wasting their homegrown wonder kids. So, Lampard turned to his trusted Derby County boys, Mason Mount and Fikayo Tomori. Meanwhile, Cobham stars Tammy Abraham and Reece James, who also recently impressed during championship loan spells, were fast-tracked into the starting 11. And, against all odds, the result of Lampard's youth team-filled Chelsea side was electric. Tammy Abraham scored 19 times, Mason Mount was shortlisted for the Premier League's Young Player of the Season award, while Fikayo Tomori and Reece James enjoyed remarkable breakthrough seasons as the Blues snuck into the top 4. With Chelsea's talent factory finally utilized, a fan base reunited under their charismatic hero Frank Lampard, and the transfer ban lifted, it appeared the perfect time for Chelsea to go bigger and better than ever in the transfer window. Abramovich and Lampard, a duo destined to conquer European football for a second time, were not messing around. First through the door was Hakim Ziyech, a £36 million creative maestro who helped Ajax to an iconic 2019 Champions League semi-final finish. Then, Timo Werner, a pacey striker who scored 29 goals in the Bundesliga the previous season, sensationally rejected the Premier League champions, Liverpool, to join Chelsea for £47 million. And the London club's transfer window grew more sensational each passing week. Ben Chilwell, who was considered England's best left-back, joined for £50 million. Thiago Silva, the feared former PSG and Brazil captain, arrived on a free transfer before Kai Havertz, arguably the world's most exciting available attacking youngster at the time, signed for a staggering £72 million. It looked like Chelsea put together some sort of super team with a combination of the dazzling youngsters that just broke through, the experienced players like Kante, Rudiger and Kovacic, and £220 million worth of summer reinforcements, but despite this, it wouldn't be long before this team would start to fall apart, and each individual player would start to be looked at as a flop, overrated, and a waste of money. Heading into the 2021 season, Chelsea won just 2 of their opening 6 Premier League fixtures and leaked goals in a style unrecognizable from the club's great teams of the past, suffering multiple 2-goal defeats to Liverpool, City, and Arsenal. Ziyech picked up an early injury while fellow attacking summer reinforcements Werner and Havertz were brutally memed for their misses and ineffectiveness in the team's most important Premier League matches. Meanwhile, at defense, despite Thiago Silva's experience and Ben Chilwell's perceived ability, Chelsea struggled to find a shape that complemented their summer arrivals. Unlike Klopp's gegenpressing Liverpool team or Guardiola's possession-based City side, Chelsea had no identity during Lampard's second season. The struggling manager helplessly switched between 4-3-1-1, 4-3-3, 3-4-2-1, and 4-1-4-1 to no avail. And to make matters worse, as rumors circulated that Rudiger vocalized his confusion about Lampard's persistently changing tactics, he was frozen out from the first team, and pressure really started to build on the English manager. The summer signings were looking like flops, the experienced players were unhappy, and results were doing Lampard no favors either. So club owner Roman Abramovich had to do something. On January 19, 2021, Chelsea lost 2-0 to Leicester, making for an inexcusable run of 1 win in 5 matches, and just like that, Lampard was sacked as Chelsea manager, with leaving the club in shambles with a team of overpriced underperformers, and this mess would take some real cleaning up. But of course, a miracle was going to happen soon. The thing was that Lampard getting the sack was no surprise. This was the Chelsea cycle, because Abramovich would only give a manager a season or two to succeed. There was no process, only immediate success. Rule was simple: win major trophies or get out. Yet even Abramovich surely couldn't have foreseen any managerial change drastically altering Chelsea's fortunes, because despite their £220 million summer spend, the Londoners sat 9th in the Premier League table. And competing with Liverpool and Manchester City for the title seemed inconceivable, as Chelsea had to focus on beating the likes of Leicester City and West Ham United first. They'd qualified for the knockout stages of the Champions League, but they were completely written off. After all, if they were being humiliated by the Premier League's mid-table clubs, they couldn't even bruise Real Madrid, Barcelona, or Bayern Munich. This is when a hero arrived in London, a man who would somehow transform a team of flops into a machine that would beat anyone. So, on January 26th, Thomas Tuchel was appointed on an 18-month contract with an almost unrealistic goal of delivering trophies before the end of the season. And, as difficult as this would be, the former PSG boss reiterated the desire for immediate success in his introductory Chelsea interview. It is about winning. The DNA of the club is to win and go for trophies. I'm here to challenge for every trophy. This year, it is the Champions League and the FA Cup. Despite his credentials earned through illustrious periods at PSG and Borussia Dortmund, few took Tuchel's Champions League optimism seriously. How could a squad of flops, internet memes, and frozen-out failures outplay the superstar-filled teams of City, Liverpool, and Madrid? But Tuchel, unlike the tactically naive Lampard, was pragmatic. He believed in defensive stability, optimizing space out of possession, and brutally hitting teams on the counterattack with pace and quality. Instantly, the new Chelsea boss ditched Lampard's confusing tactics and simplified their game plan. During Tuchel's opening game, a dull 0-0 tie at home to Wolverhampton Wanderers, Chelsea switched to a back three with Silva, Rudiger, and Azpilicueta named as the center-backs pairing for the first time. As supporters saw the world-class trio, most notably Rudiger, who'd been frozen out by Lampard, line up alongside each other, suddenly a cautious sense of optimism swept over Stamford Bridge. Chelsea won each of their next 4 Premier League matches and conceded just once with their new 3-4-2-1 system, but they were still dismissed by outsiders as a team of overpaid flops when they traveled to the cauldron-like atmosphere of Atletico Madrid in the Champions League last 16. The Spanish side topped La Liga and possessed a devastating attack of Luis Suarez, Joao Felix, Angel Correa, and Thomas Lemar, and looked set to inflict damage on Chelsea's newly assembled defensive structure. Yet, once again, Tuchel's team remained resolute. Giroud notched a carefully placed left-footed effort to send Chelsea back to Stamford Bridge with an unlikely 1-0 advantage. In the 4 games between the first and second leg against Atletico, which included tricky games against Liverpool and United, Chelsea kept another 4 clean sheets, and their doubters were beginning to retract their claims. Tuchel's team of previously considered flops bulldozed past Simeone's La Liga leaders with a comfortable 2-0 win, and suddenly, Chelsea wasn't just a strong defensive unit, they were an attacking force to be reckoned with. Summer signings Havertz, Ziyech, and Werner were intricately linking up for goals, destroying teams on the break with their balance of pace, skill, and creativity, and were finally looking like the outfit Abramovich and Lampard intended them to be at the start of this season. Meanwhile, Lampard's Cobham boys, Mason Mount, Callum Hudson-Odoi, Reece James, and Billy Gilmore received the same exposure they received under their previous boss, but had a structure which enabled them to maximize their ability. James, freed from Lampard's rigid back four, played the wing-back role, complementing the Londoners' attacking threat and neutralizing defensive fragilities and inexperience with a dependable back three ready to support him. Mount was ridiculed for being Lampard's love child, but remained among the first names on the team sheet under Tuchel. The German gaffer's refined system gave Mount stability as he flourished with 5 goals in Tuchel's first 10 matches. So, with the continued integration of Chelsea's academy prospects, clear communication with players, and game-changing tactical expertise, Tuchel quickly became the most popular man in West London. His team of written-off stars looked on the cusps of doing something special. Chelsea eased past Porto and Sheffield United in the quarterfinals of the FA Cup and Champions League. Meanwhile, in the 12-game Premier League form table since Tuchel's late January arrival, Chelsea were second, only behind Guardiola's Manchester City. But to be the best, Tuchel would have to beat the best, and in a season-defining 3-week period, Chelsea would face City twice, once in the FA Cup and once in the league with European qualification on the line, and not to mention facing Real Madrid twice too, as they were drawn in the Champions League semi-final. Which meant that the next month was going to be the most important time in Tuchel's entire career. But very quickly before we get to this, I just want to ask you to subscribe. I put so much effort into these videos and your support means the world to me, so thank you. Okay, now let's get back to the story because things are really starting to get crazy. On April 17th, Chelsea faced Man City in an FA Cup semi-final tie under the gleaming Wembley Arch. Guardiola's team was filled with stars as the likes of Rodri, Kevin De Bruyne, and Joao Cancelo confidently lined up alongside Chelsea's still relatively unproven team in the stadium's iconic tunnel. But despite the confidence of Man City's greats, the game didn't go according to plan. City tried to attack Tuchel's system, but the back five of Ben Chilwell, Thiago Silva, Antonio Rudiger, Cesar Azpilicueta, and Reece James were unflustered. The Premier League leaders were limited to half chances as they slowly passed the ball from side to side. Eventually, a ball was intricately slipped in behind to Werner, who used his blistering pace and squared the ball to Ziyech, who slotted it into the open net. 1-0. Despite City's best efforts, they were unable to draw level after 90 minutes. It was a monumental victory for the London club, but more importantly, an insane confidence boost for both the players and the manager as they now believe they could go toe-to-toe with Guardiola and win. And this is something that would be really important through the rest of the season as they would face Guardiola's men another 2 times, with the last being the most important game of their lives. After this first match against City, Guardiola began to overthink. He had just been tactically outclassed, and his overthinking would prove to bite him later on. But for now, Chelsea continued to charge. They arrived at the towering stands of the Bernabeu with a newfound swagger, a belief they could comfortably withstand the pressure of the world's greatest teams. Tuchel's side earned a respectable 1-1 draw in Madrid as they limited the La Liga Titans to a handful of chances. Zinedine Zidane's star-studded squad were forced to travel without an advantage to Stamford Bridge, but at this time, stadiums were empty because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but still, there was something different in the air at Stamford Bridge during the second leg against Madrid. It was as if the souls of supporters from Chelsea's great European ties of years gone by returned to the stadium to unsettle Real. And unsettled they were as the Champions League dominant side crumbled. Tuchel's team hunted them like dogs and bullied their way to a 2-0 win and a place in the tournament's final, thanks to goals from Mason Mount and Timo Werner. The German striker was visibly crushed by confidence during a difficult first half of the campaign under Lampard. But thanks to the man management and confidence instilled by his countryman manager, Werner suddenly stood proud and tall as he was making the difference in the most important games. Tuchel would have to continue playing mind games to strike belief into his players and fear into his opposition, because in the Champions League final, Chelsea would face Premier League rivals Man City again. Guardiola must have been filled with dread once he learned he'd come up against Tuchel's regimented defensive setup, a tactical system that fooled him in the FA Cup semi a couple of weeks earlier in what would be the biggest game in City's history. But the genius Spanish manager would have another opportunity to understand Tuchel's deadly 3-4-2-1 formation because City, who'd already clinched the Premier League, hosted Chelsea at the Etihad Stadium in the final weeks of the league campaign. For Guardiola, his players, and their adoring supporters, the May 8th Premier League clash with Chelsea was only about warming up for the Champions League final at the end of the month. City matched Tuchel's back five structure, and for a moment it looked like they'd found the secret to beating the Chelsea side who were defeating Europe's best. With Rodri dictating play from deep in midfield, City eventually found an opening as Sergio Aguero tapped the ball to Raheem Sterling, who smashed the ball home. But the second half wasn't played with the same ease. Aguero missed a penalty and City lost all composure. Ziyech, who scored against City at Wembley, slotted impressively to level the game as Chelsea started to bombard and expose Guardiola's side's weaknesses out of possession. In the final minutes, Werner crossed the ball to Alonso, who scrambled the ball in to secure an unlikely win at the Etihad. Thomas Tuchel had done it again. 2 games against the Premier League Titans in a month, 2 tactical masterclasses, and 2 statement victories that caused Guardiola to lose his mind ahead of the final a few weeks later. The Champions League final would be among the first matches supporters were allowed to attend since the coronavirus pandemic. While approximately 14,000 City and Chelsea fans excitedly flocked to Porto for the biggest game of the year, Guardiola must have been locked away in a dark room fighting his racing thoughts. Because the former Barcelona manager's team selection for the final was bizarre, as City had struggled to break down Tuchel's defense in the previous 2 encounters, scoring just once over 180 minutes. Guardiola opted for an additional attacking midfielder at the expense of their trusty anchorman Rodri. City lined up with Ilkay Gundogan, Phil Foden, and Bernardo Silva in midfield, 3 excellent technicians capable of inflicting damage on Chelsea's resolute structure, but without a defensive man to protect City in transition, which was an area Tuchel's side had proven deadly during previous encounters. To continue City's instabilities, Pep moved away from the back 5 that featured in the previous game with Chelsea and switched to a 4-3-3. As the German gaffer read Guardiola's lineup, he must have felt the battle of his career was already half won. How could his genius rival manager not select a defensive midfielder and change formation for a game of such magnitude? Perhaps the tactical genius was finally losing his mind. This wasn't the time for experimentation. Tuchel persisted in the trusted 3-4-2-1 formation that had brought the London club so much joy since Lampard departed the club a few months earlier. Summer signings Edouard Mendy, Ben Chilwell, Thiago Silva, Kai Havertz, and Timo Werner, each of whom were doubted for their misfires at the start of the season, featured in Tuchel's starting 11. Meanwhile, Mason Mount and Reece James, 2 players previously considered as little more than Lampard's favorites, were also trusted in the lineup to take down Guardiola's City. As the players emerged through the tunnel for the season's decisive game, there was a clear contrast in the mentalities of the 2 teams. City looked tired, unorganized, and ill-focused, as if their manager Guardiola had been distracted or unclear over the previous days. A few meters to the left, Chelsea's players, confident and assured in their familiar tactics instructed to them by Tuchel, stood tall, determined, and focused like warriors entering a coliseum to fight to the death. And that's exactly what Tuchel's flops turned heroes did. Of course, there would be moments of panic, periods without touching the ball, and fortunate escapes against Guardiola's world-class City team. But almost every time they entered Chelsea's box, one of the London club's resurgent defenders was there to rescue them. Eventually, after soaking up the pressure for much of the first half, it happened. Chelsea's previously written-off strugglers took the lead against Manchester City in the Champions League final. Mount played a wonderful ball through to Havertz, arguably not just Chelsea's but the Premier League's most discussed flop during the first half of the season, who rounded the keeper to give his team the lead. And as a result of Chelsea's strong defense, City reverted back to the painful side-to-side passing that brought them little joy during the previous 2 matches and predictably failed to find a way through. After comfortably seeing out the second half, Chelsea had done it. They won the Champions League for the 2nd time in the London club's history, elevating their status among Europe's most successful clubs. Scenes of jubilation swept the pitch. The much-debated Cobham graduates, the previous summer's expensive signings, and experienced heads frozen out by Lampard huddled together to celebrate one of the historic competition's most unlikely winners. After this match, almost everybody was in agreement about one thing: Thomas Tuchel was a football genius. And the following season, with the Champions League trophy sitting proudly at the forefront of their trophy cabinet, Chelsea remained solid, winning the Super Cup and Club World Cup and finishing 3rd in the Premier League. Tuchel's team almost knocked eventual winners Real Madrid out of the Champions League in back-to-back years, but fell victim to a late comeback by the Galacticos. But then, to everyone's surprise, despite Tuchel's success and clear understanding of how to win the Stamford Bridge Club silverware, Chelsea were undergoing serious changes. Abramovich was forced to sell the club to a controversial American consortium who bizarrely sacked Tuchel at the start of the 22-23 campaign, which now has proved to be a colossal error, and it can be seen as the negative turning point in Chelsea Football Club. Chelsea dropped to an unthinkable 12th place finish as players like Havertz, Chilwell, Mount, James, and Mendy reverted to their form displayed under Lampard at the start of the 2021 campaign. Today, most of Chelsea's major 2020 summer signings have been sold after failing to consistently produce the goods. Timo Werner performed so badly, he ended up at London rivals Tottenham Hotspur, where he continues to struggle today. Meanwhile, Academy stars Mount, James, and Abraham, among others, have failed to realize the potential they threatened during their time under Tuchel. Perhaps Chelsea's 2021 team truly was a team of underperformers. It just had the tactical genius of Tuchel to hold it together and win the most unlikely title in Champions League history. What a story!